I sat at the head of the long mahogany dining table, staring at the extravagant custom cake my daughter-in-law had ordered for me. But the real icing on the cake was not the 73 candles. It was the vicious scream that just tore through the dining room. "You are a despicable, useless old man." Chloe spat the words at me, her face flushed with rage, her expensive pearl earrings shaking. The soft jazz music playing in the background suddenly felt deafening. The clinking of silverware stopped. All eyes from the wealthy guests turned toward me. I looked at her, then at my son Julian, who simply stared at his expensive Italian shoes, refusing to meet my gaze. I did not yell back. I just gently set my wine glass down, the soft clink echoing in the heavy silence. Looking straight into her pale blue eyes, I calmly asked a simple question. If today, right now, you found out you were completely homeless, how would you feel? The entire room fell into a stunned silence. They thought I was just a crazy, broke old mechanic spouting bitter nonsense. They had no idea I was about to make that exact scenario their new reality. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to deal with a family member who mistook your silence for weakness. The tension in the dining room of their sprawling suburban mansion was suffocating. We were supposed to be celebrating my 73rd birthday. Instead, I was being publicly executed by the woman my son had chosen to marry. Chloe stood at the opposite end of the table, gripping the edge so hard her knuckles were white. Her anger was not about a birthday cake or a family misunderstanding. It was about money. It was always about money with Chloe. Just an hour before the guests arrived, she had pulled me into the study and shoved a stack of bank papers into my chest. She demanded I co-sign a $150,000 business loan for her failing fashion boutique. When I calmly handed the papers back and told her no, the mask slipped. She spent the entire dinner drinking heavily, her resentment boiling over until she could not contain it anymore. $150,000, Desmond, she mocked loudly, pacing behind her chair so everyone could hear. That is all I asked for, just a signature. It is not like I asked you for cash. We all know you do not have a dime to your name anyway. You worked in a greasy garage for 40 years. Your pension barely covers your groceries. The only thing you have left of any value in this world is a clean credit score because you never spent money on anything nice in your entire miserable life. And you will not even let us use that. I sat there breathing slowly, letting her words hang in the air. I looked down at my hands. They were dark-lined and calloused from 4 decades of wrestling with engines breathing in exhaust and freezing in Detroit winters. I worked those hands to the bone to put my son Julian through college so he would not have to scrub grease from under his fingernails like his father. My late wife Vivian and I sacrificed every luxury so Julian could wear nice clothes, live in safe neighborhoods, and eventually marry into the kind of world Chloe came from. A world of country clubs, trust funds, and blind privilege. I shifted my gaze to Julian. He was 35 years old, wearing a suit that cost more than my first car, but in that moment he looked like a frightened child. He sat slouched in his chair, swirling the expensive whiskey in his glass. "Julian," I said, my voice low and steady, "are you going to let your wife speak to your father this way in your own home?" Julian swallowed hard. He looked up, his eyes darting nervously between Chloe and me. "Dad," he mumbled, his voice pathetic and weak. "Come on. Chloe is just stressed about the boutique. You know how much it means to her. It is just a signature, Dad. You are not risking anything. We would make the payments. You are just being stubborn." My heart, which had endured the grief of losing Vivian 10 years ago, cracked a little more. The betrayal from my own flesh and blood stung far worse than any insult Chloe could throw at me. He was not defending his wife out of love. He was defending her out of cowardice. He was complicit in my humiliation. Chloe let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "Do not bother asking him for help, Desmond. Julian knows I am right. We let you come to this house. We feed you. We invite you to our parties so you do not have to sit alone in that rotting shack of yours in the suburbs. We give you a taste of a good life, and you repay us with this selfish, stingy attitude. You are exactly what my parents always said you were. A stubborn, ungrateful old man who does not know his place." The murmurs of the guests grew slightly louder. Some of Chloe's affluent friends were looking at me with undisguised pity, while others looked at me with disgust as if I had tracked mud onto their pristine white carpets. They saw exactly what Chloe wanted them to see. A poor, uneducated African-American senior citizen who was bringing down the vibe of their elegant evening. I did not feel the need to raise my voice. When you know the truth, you do not need to shout. I pushed my chair back and stood up slowly. The room went completely quiet again. I reached into the inner pocket of my worn tweed jacket and pulled out a flat, rectangular gift box wrapped in silver paper with a neat blue bow. I walked over to the center of the table and set it down gently next to a bouquet of imported orchids. "I brought this for you and Julian," I said smoothly. "I know it is my birthday, but Vivian and I always believed that a parent's greatest joy was giving to their children." Chloe sneered, crossing her arms. "What is that?" "A coupon for a free oil change. I am not interested in your garbage, Desmond. I am interested in building a real future for my family. A future you are actively trying to destroy." I ignored her insult and looked one last time at my son. "Julian," I said, lowering my voice so only he could feel the weight of it, "I hope one day you find your spine, because a man who cannot protect his father from disrespect will eventually not be able to protect himself." Julian flinched his face, turning a deep shade of crimson, but he kept his mouth shut. I turned back to Chloe, maintaining my composure. That was when I asked the question. "If today, right now, you found out you were completely homeless, how would you feel?" Chloe scoffed, rolling her eyes dramatically. "What kind of ridiculous, manipulative question is that? I live in a $2 million estate. I will never be homeless. Stop trying to sound profound, old man. It is pathetic. Go back to your little house and count your pennies." I nodded slowly, a faint, cold smile touching the corners of my mouth. "Enjoy the cake, Chloe. Happy anniversary to you both." Without another word, I turned my back on them. I walked through the grand foyer, my footsteps silent on their marble floors. I grabbed my old wool coat from the closet. The butler, a young man who looked incredibly uncomfortable, handed me my hat and opened the heavy oak door for me. I stepped out into the crisp, biting night air. I did not look back at the brightly lit windows. I took out my phone and ordered a ride. As I stood on the immaculate driveway waiting for the car, I thought about the silver box I had left on their dining table. Inside that box was a certified bank cashier's check and a deed payoff letter. I had planned to pay off the entire remaining balance of their mortgage as my birthday gift to them. I had planned to secure their home so they would never have to worry about a roof over their heads again. But the moment Chloe demanded I sign that fraudulent loan document, and the moment Julian let her strip me of my dignity, my plans changed. The box on the table was real, but the papers inside were now completely void, just a phantom of the financial salvation they could have had. The ride arrived. I slid into the back seat and gave the driver the address to my house on the east side of town. It was a modest, single-story brick house with a small porch and an old oak tree in the front yard. It was the same house Vivian and I bought 45 years ago. To Chloe and Julian, it was a decaying shack that proved I was a failure. They did not know that I liked that old house. They did not know that living below my means was a deliberate choice. Chloe thought she had me figured out. She thought I was just a tired old pensioner surviving on Social Security. She had no idea what I did with the money I earned during those 40 years at the auto plant. She did not know that while my coworkers were buying flashy cars and expensive watches, Vivian and I were buying up cheap, abandoned lots near the dying industrial sectors. She did not know that when the city began to revitalize, developers paid me fortunes for that land. Chloe only saw a blue-collar worker. She did not see the man who quietly built a real estate portfolio worth over $45 million. She did not know that I owned the commercial building where her failing boutique was currently renting space. And most importantly, she did not know that her disrespect tonight had just awakened a sleeping giant. I leaned my head against the cold window of the car, watching the city lights blur past. I was not angry anymore. I was focused. The time for being the quiet, accommodating father was over. If they wanted to treat me like a disposable nuisance, I was going to show them exactly what happens when you try to discard the man who secretly owns the ground you walk on. The morning sun broke through the thin curtains of my bedroom, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. I woke up at exactly 5 in the morning, just like I had every single day for the last 40 years. I walked into my small kitchen, brewed a pot of strong black coffee, and sat at the Formica table. The house was dead quiet, but my mind was loud. The memory of the previous night still burned in my chest like a hot coal. My own son, Julian, had stood by and watched his wife, Chloe, humiliate me in front of dozens of strangers. He chose his wealthy lifestyle over his own father. I needed to clear my head. I grabbed my worn leather jacket and decided to take a walk to the local hardware store. The crisp morning air usually helped me think, helped me calculate my next moves. I expected to be gone for a couple of hours. I ended up returning much earlier than planned. The hardware store was closed for inventory, so I turned back around. As I turned the corner onto my quiet suburban street, my instincts immediately kicked in. Parked 2 houses down, partially hidden behind a large oak tree, was a sleek silver Range Rover. It was Chloe's car. My pulse did not race. It simply slowed down, turning into a steady, cold drumbeat. I walked up my driveway silently, stepping carefully on the grass to avoid making any noise on the gravel path. When I reached the front porch, I noticed the heavy wooden door was completely closed, but the brass deadbolt was not engaged. I always lock the deadbolt. Always. Julian had a spare key for emergencies. I had given it to him 5 years ago when I had a mild scare with my blood pressure. It was an emergency key meant to save my life. Now it was being used to invade my home. Instead of turning the brass knob and confronting them, I moved quietly along the side of the house. The bushes there were thick, planted decades ago by my late wife Vivian. I pressed my back against the cold brick wall and peered through the slight gap in the living room blinds. My jaw tightened so hard my teeth ached. There they were, my son Julian and his wife Chloe, standing right in the middle of my personal sanctuary. They were not there to apologize for the horrible things they said last night. They were not there to check on my well-being. They were actively tearing through my personal belongings like common thieves. Chloe was standing by my old metal filing cabinet in the corner of the room. The bottom drawer was pulled wide open. She was aggressively flipping through manila folders, tossing my private papers onto my worn armchair. She wore a designer trench coat and held a coffee cup, looking around my home with a face full of absolute disgust. Julian was standing near the fireplace, nervously shifting his weight from foot to foot. He kept looking toward the front window, playing the role of a pathetic lookout for a burglar. I reached out and cracked the window open just a fraction of an inch. It was an old wooden frame, and I knew exactly where to press so it would not make a sound. Their voices drifted out into the crisp morning air, clear as crystal. "Hurry up, Julian!" Chloe snapped loudly. "The old man is probably walking around the park, but he could be back any minute. Where does he keep his property documents?" "I do not know, Chloe," Julian whispered back, his voice shaking. "I hate doing this. We should not be doing this behind his back. What if he catches us?" "Oh, grow a spine, Julian," she hissed, slamming one drawer shut and yanking open another. "He embarrassed us last night in front of my parents and all our friends. He refused to sign the business loan. We are drowning in debt, and he is sitting on a gold mine. Look at this rundown shack. It is completely outdated and smells like old medicine, but the land value in this neighborhood has skyrocketed. Even this rotting piece of garbage could easily sell for $400,000 in cash." Julian rubbed his face with his hands. "We cannot just sell his house, Chloe. He lives here. It is his home." "Not for long," she replied, her voice dripping with pure malice. "We need to find the deed. We need to figure out exactly whose name is on the title and get it transferred. We have to get control of this house before the old man blows it all on medical bills or leaves it to some charity just to spite us. We need that $400,000 to save my boutique and pay off your stupid credit cards. Once we have the deed, we can figure out what to do with him later." I stood frozen in the bushes, letting the cold reality wash over me, my own flesh and blood. My son was standing in the very living room where I taught him how to walk, allowing his greedy wife to hunt for the deed to my house. They thought I was a fragile, clueless senior citizen living on a fixed income. They thought my only asset in this world was a $400,000 house. They had absolutely no idea they were trying to steal pennies from a man who could buy their entire neighborhood with a single phone call. The anger inside me crystallized into something incredibly sharp and precise. Any normal father would have kicked the front door open, screamed at them, and called the police for trespassing. But I am not a normal man. I am Desmond Holloway. I survived the brutal streets of my youth. I survived 40 years in the auto plants, and I survived the cutthroat world of commercial real estate investing. When a rat enters your house, you do not yell at it. You set a trap. I quietly stepped back from the window. I walked backwards slowly, making sure not to snap a single twig under my boots. I returned to the sidewalk and walked casually down the block, moving away from my own house. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my phone. I dialed a number that very few people in the city had. It rang twice before a sharp professional voice answered. "Good morning, Mr. Holloway. It is Sunday morning. To what do I owe the pleasure?" "Sterling," I said smoothly, keeping my pace steady. "I need you to do some creative paperwork for me today." My private attorney Sterling was one of the most ruthless and efficient legal minds in the state. He handled all my multi-million-dollar trust funds, my commercial properties, and my shell companies. He knew exactly how wealthy I really was, and he knew I did not call on a Sunday unless someone was about to be ruined. "I am listening," Desmond Sterling replied. "I need a decoy file," I told him as I walked under the shade of the neighborhood trees. "I want you to draft a very official-looking document. Make it a final notice of severe tax debt. Make it look like I am about to lose my house to foreclosure within the next 30 days. I want documents that show I am completely broke, drowning in unpaid medical bills, and on the verge of total financial collapse." Sterling chuckled softly over the line. "Setting a trap for the vultures, are we?" "Exactly," I replied. "My son and his wife are currently ransacking my living room looking for my property deed. They want to sell my house to pay off their debts. I want to give them something to find, but I want it to be a document that will send them into an absolute panic. Have the papers printed on official letterhead and age them slightly so they look like they arrived in the mail last week. I will send a private courier to pick them up in 2 hours." "Consider it done," Mr. Holloway Sterling said. "It will look terrifyingly real." I hung up the phone and looked up at the clear blue sky. Chloe and Julian thought they were hunting a helpless old man. They thought they were the smart predators in this game. They had absolutely no idea they had just stepped into a steel cage, and I was the one holding the key. I walked toward a small diner a few blocks away. I was going to order a large breakfast and take my time drinking my coffee. I was going to let them finish their little illegal search. They would find nothing today, but tomorrow I would leave the perfect bait right on my kitchen table, and I would watch them swallow the hook. I sat at the head of the long mahogany dining table staring at the extravagant custom cake my daughter-in-law had ordered for me. But the real icing on the cake was not the 73 candles. It was the vicious scream that just tore through the dining room. "You are a despicable, useless old man." Chloe spat the words at me, her face flushed with rage, her expensive pearl earrings shaking. The soft jazz music playing in the background suddenly felt deafening. The clinking of silverware stopped. All eyes from the wealthy guest turned toward me. I looked at her, then at my son Julian, who simply stared at his expensive Italian shoes, refusing to meet my gaze. I did not yell back. I just gently set my wine glass down, the soft clink echoing in the heavy silence. Looking straight into her pale blue eyes, I calmly asked a simple question. If today, right now, you found out you were completely homeless, how would you feel? The entire room fell into a stunned silence. They thought I was just a crazy, broke old mechanic spouting bitter nonsense. They had no idea I was about to make that exact scenario their new reality. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to deal with a family member who mistook your silence for weakness. The private courier arrived exactly at noon. He handed me a sealed manila envelope containing the documents I had requested from my lawyer Sterling. I sat at my kitchen table and spread the papers out. Sterling was a master of his craft. The documents looked terrifyingly authentic. The bold red letters at the top of the page read, "Final notice of tax delinquency and intent to foreclose." The text detailed a massive fabricated debt threatening the immediate seizure of my property within 14 days if the balance was not paid in full. To any greedy vulture, this paper was a death sentence. It meant the house they wanted to steal was about to belong to the government. I carefully placed the fake letter right in the center of the worn oak table next to my reading glasses and a half-empty mug of coffee. It was impossible to miss. Then I walked into the living room, sat down in my old recliner, pulled a knitted blanket over my legs, and closed my eyes. I did not have to wait long. Chloe always dropped by my house on Tuesday afternoons. She claimed she was checking in on me, but I knew she was just taking inventory of the property measuring rooms with her eyes planning renovations for when I was gone. Sure enough, at exactly 2 in the afternoon, I heard the familiar sound of the spare key turning in the lock. She did not bother to knock. She pushed the heavy wooden door open and stepped inside, her high heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. I kept my breathing slow and even, pretending to be fast asleep in my chair. Through the narrow slit of my half-open eyes, I watched her walk past the living room and head straight into the kitchen. I waited in the silence. 10 seconds passed, then 20. Suddenly, the clicking of her heels stopped completely. I knew exactly what she was looking at. I listened closely. I could hear the sharp intake of her breath. I heard the rustle of the thick paper as she picked it up. Even from the living room, I could picture the exact look of absolute horror washing over her face. In her mind, the $400,000 gold mine she was banking on to save her failing boutique and pay off her massive debts was evaporating into thin air. I heard her frantically tapping on the phone screen, no doubt sending a panicked text message to Julian. The government is taking the house. We are losing everything. After a few minutes of frantic pacing in the kitchen, I heard her quietly slip out the back door. I smiled in the quiet of my living room. The bait was in the water, and the shark was circling. An hour later, the front doorbell rang. She was knocking this time. How polite. I waited a moment before slowly lifting myself out of the chair, shuffling my feet across the floor to play the part of the tired, frail old man. I opened the door. Chloe stood on the porch holding a thermal container and wearing the most sickeningly sweet smile I had ever seen. The woman who, just 48 hours ago, had screamed in my face and called me a despicable, useless old man, was now looking at me with eyes full of fake, manufactured warmth. "Desmond," she said softly, her voice dripping with artificial affection, "I hope I did not wake you. I was just at the gourmet market downtown, and I saw this incredible roasted chicken soup. I know you love warm meals on chilly days, so I thought I would bring you some lunch." I looked at her, blinking slowly, playing the confused senior citizen to perfection. "Chloe, what a surprise. You did not have to do that. Please come inside." She stepped into the house, bringing the overwhelming scent of her expensive floral perfume with her. She walked to the kitchen, poured the soup into a bowl, and brought it to me in the living room. She set it on the small table next to my recliner, and then pulled up a wooden chair, sitting uncomfortably close to me. "We need to talk, Desmond," she said, her voice dropping to a low, concerned whisper. When I went into the kitchen to get the bowl, I accidentally saw a letter on your table. I did not mean to pry, I swear. But Desmond, why did you not tell us you were in financial trouble? I looked down at my hands, letting my shoulders slump. I let out a heavy, defeated sigh. "I did not want to be a burden to you and Julian," I mumbled, making my voice sound shaky and weak. "You two have your own lives, your own expenses. I thought I could handle the tax office, but the penalties just kept piling up. Now they are threatening to take the house. It is all I have left." Chloe reached out and gently placed her manicured hand over my rough, calloused fingers. The physical contact must have taken every ounce of her willpower, but she held her smile steady. "Desmond, you are family," she said softly. "You are never a burden. Julian and I cannot just sit back and watch you lose your home to the government. You work too hard for this place. We want to help you. We have to protect your assets." I looked up at her, widening my eyes in feigned gratitude. "How could you possibly help? The debt is massive. I do not have the cash." "You do not need cash right now," she replied quickly, her true motive finally bubbling to the surface. "You just need proper representation. Julian and I have lawyers. We know how to talk to these tax agencies and freeze the foreclosure process. But the government will not talk to us unless we have the legal right to represent you." She paused, letting her words sink in before delivering the killing blow. "You need to sign a power of attorney over to Julian Desmond. Just a general financial power of attorney. If you sign it, Julian can legally take over the negotiations. He can protect the house from being seized. You will not have to worry about a single thing anymore. We will handle all the stress for you. A power of attorney. The ultimate prize." If I signed that document, they would have total legal control over my life. They could sell the house, empty whatever bank accounts they thought I had, and throw me into the cheapest state-run nursing home they could find. They were trying to rob me blind while pretending to be my saviors. A power of attorney. I repeated slowly, letting my hand tremble slightly. "That is a very big step, Chloe. Giving up control of my finances. I do not know if I am ready for that." Chloe squeezed my hand a little tighter, her eyes pleading with manufactured desperation. "It is just a piece of paper, Desmond. It is just to save the house. You trust your own son, do you not? Julian loves you. I love you. We are only trying to protect your future. Please just think about it. I will bring the paperwork tomorrow, just in case you are ready to let us help you." I nodded slowly, looking down at the bowl of soup she had brought. "I will think about it, Chloe. Thank you." You are being very kind." She smiled brilliantly, clearly satisfied that her manipulation was working. "Of course, Desmond. We are family. Eat your soup while it is hot. I have to get back to the boutique, but I will see you tomorrow." She stood up, smoothed out her designer coat, and walked toward the front door. I remained seated in my recliner, perfectly still, watching her through the reflection of the large mirror hanging in the hallway. As soon as she reached the entryway, believing my back was turned and I could no longer see her, the sweet, caring daughter-in-law vanished completely. Her face twisted into an expression of profound, unfiltered disgust. She quickly dug into her expensive leather handbag and pulled out a small bottle of liquid hand sanitizer. She squirted a generous amount into her palms and rubbed her hands together aggressively, scrubbing the skin where she had touched my fingers. She wiped her hands on a tissue, shivering as if she had just touched a diseased animal, and threw the tissue into my hallway trash can before slipping out the front door. The heavy door clicked shut. I was alone again. I stood up from the recliner, my trembling hands completely steadied, my stooped posture straightened. I walked over to the trash can and looked down at the discarded tissue. Then I looked at the bowl of cheap store-bought soup she had brought me. I picked up the bowl, walked into the kitchen, and poured the entire thing down the drain. Chloe thought she was playing a brilliant game of chess. She thought she was manipulating a confused, desperate old man into handing over the keys to his kingdom. She had no idea that I had just handed her a shovel and she was happily digging her own grave. Tomorrow she would bring the power of attorney documents, and tomorrow the real game would begin. The very next afternoon, right on schedule, Chloe returned to my house. She walked through the front door, holding a thick manila folder pressed against her chest, carrying it like it was the key to her salvation. She wore a soft pink sweater today, a calculated choice to make her look warm, approachable, and innocent. But I could see the rigid tension in her jaw. She was anxious to close the deal. She sat across from me at the kitchen table and gently slid the folder toward my hands. Inside was the power of attorney document. She had even brought a fancy silver pen, placing it deliberately right next to the signature line. "I need you to look this over, Desmond," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Julian and I stayed up all night worrying about your tax situation. If you just sign right there at the bottom, we can take over the legal burden. You will not have to lose another night of sleep over this house." I picked up the document with deliberate slowness. I held it at arm's length, squinting at the dense legal jargon as if the words were swimming on the page. I let the silence stretch, listening to her breathing quicken with anticipation. Then I slowly put the paper back down on the table and pushed the silver pen away. "I cannot sign this today, Chloe," I said, making my voice sound raspy and exhausted. "My eyes are just too tired to read all this fine print. I need a few days to think about it. Handing over my financial rights is a very big decision for a man my age." For a fraction of a second, the sweet daughter-in-law facade shattered. Her pale blue eyes went wide with pure panic, and her lips pressed together so tightly they turned white. She let out a sharp, frustrated breath through her nose, but quickly forced the fake smile back onto her face. "Of course, Desmond," she said, her voice tight and trembling slightly. "You take all the time you need. We just want what is best for you." But Chloe was not a woman who liked to wait, especially not when she owed hundreds of thousands of dollars to people who did not politely knock on doors. If she could not convince me to sign the papers with a smile, she was going to have to force my hand. That was when the afternoon tea ritual began. The following day, Chloe showed up at exactly 4 o'clock. She claimed she was just dropping by to keep me company, noting how stressed I had looked the day before. She went straight into my kitchen and began boiling water. "You need to relax, Desmond," she called out from the stove. "I brought some special herbal tea from my boutique. It has chamomile and valerian root. It works wonders for anxiety." She walked into the living room and handed me a steaming ceramic mug. She sat down opposite me, watching me intently. I blew on the hot liquid and took a very small, cautious sip. 40 years working in the auto plants of Detroit teaches you a lot of things. You learn to identify a chemical leak before you even see it. You learn how to read the air, the smells, the subtle tastes of things that do not belong. As the warm tea hit my tongue, I instantly tasted it. Beneath the floral notes of the chamomile, there was a harsh, bitter, chalky undertone. It was the unmistakable taste of crushed medication. She was putting sedatives in my tea. My blood ran completely cold. This was no longer just a greedy attempt to steal my house. This was physical assault. She was intentionally drugging a 73-year-old man just to make him compliant. I swallowed the tiny sip, suppressing the urge to throw the boiling tea directly into her face. Instead, I offered a weak, grateful smile. "This is delicious, Chloe," I mumbled. "Thank you." I waited for her phone to buzz. When she finally looked down to read a text message from her creditors, I casually reached over and poured the contents of the mug directly into the soil of Vivian's large potted ficus plant sitting next to my chair. I left just a few drops at the bottom to make it look convincing. I let my head fall back against the recliner, letting out a long, heavy sigh. I closed my eyes and let my jaw go slack. "Are you feeling tired, Desmond?" she asked, leaning forward, her voice laced with eager anticipation. "Just a bit groggy," I whispered, slurring my words perfectly. "I think I need to rest my eyes." I heard her stand up. I felt her presence looming right over my chair, staring down at me to confirm the drugs were working. When she was satisfied, she quietly grabbed her purse and left the house. For the next 4 days, we played this exact same game. She would bring the poison tea, I would secretly pour it into the dirt, and then I would give her the greatest acting performance of my life. If Chloe wanted a broken, senile old man, I was going to give her a masterpiece. I started dropping my house keys on the floor and staring at them as if I had forgotten what they were for. When she would speak to me, I would intentionally delay my responses, staring blankly at the wall before answering. I made my hands shake violently whenever I held a glass of water, letting it spill over the edges onto my shirt. I began repeating the same questions within a 5-minute span. Did Julian call today? Wait, what day is it again? I watched her reactions through the reflection of the turned-off television screen. She never looked concerned. She never asked if I needed to see my regular doctor. Instead, she looked triumphant. She would text furiously on her phone, setting up the final stage of her trap. She was documenting my rapid cognitive decline, preparing her narrative. The climax of her setup arrived on Friday evening. Julian came over after work, loosening his expensive silk tie as he walked through the front door. Chloe was already there, waiting in the kitchen. This was the moment I had been preparing for. When Julian walked into the living room to greet me, I did not look at him. I was standing in front of the open refrigerator, holding the television remote control. I slowly placed the remote on the top shelf next to a carton of milk, muttered something completely incoherent to myself, and slowly closed the fridge door. I turned around and looked at my son with vacant, empty eyes. "Julian," I said, making my voice sound frail and utterly lost. "Why are you wearing your school uniform? You are going to miss the school bus, son." Julian froze in his tracks. The color drained completely from his face. He looked at me, then looked at the refrigerator, genuinely horrified. "Dad, what are you talking about?" Julian stammered, stepping toward me. "Dad, it is me. I am 35. I just got off work." I blinked rapidly, letting my hands shake at my sides. "Work? Where is Vivian? Did your mother go to the grocery store?" Vivian had been dead for 10 years. Hearing me ask for my late wife was the final push Julian needed. He backed away from me, his breathing shallow. He turned toward the kitchen where Chloe was standing in the doorway, wearing an expression of deeply manufactured sorrow. "Chloe, what is wrong with him?" Julian whispered frantically, his voice cracking with panic. "He has degraded so fast. He does not even know what decade it is." He put the remote in the fridge. "We need to take him to the emergency room right now. Something is seriously wrong with his brain. Any decent son would have grabbed his father by the arm, put him in the passenger seat, and driven straight to the nearest hospital. Any real man would have demanded a full neurological panel and blood tests. But Chloe quickly stepped forward and placed her hands firmly on Julian's chest, stopping him from reaching for his phone. "No, Julian. Listen to me," she said, keeping her voice low and urgent. "Think about this logically. If we take him to the emergency room, the state will get involved. The hospital will hold him for days, run incredibly expensive tests, and they will formally flag him in the public health system. Do you know what happens then? Social workers take over. They will freeze his assets to pay for a state-mandated care facility. We will lose all control over the house and the tax debt negotiations." Julian dragged his hands through his hair, pacing the living room floor. "But we cannot just leave him like this, Chloe. Look at him. He needs a doctor." "He does need a doctor," Chloe agreed quickly, expertly guiding him right into her trap. "But we need to keep this private to protect his assets and our inheritance. I know a private physician, a specialist in geriatric cognitive decline. He is very discreet. He can come to the house tonight, evaluate your father in the comfort of his own home, and issue the necessary legal medical declarations we need for the power of attorney. No hospitals, no state interference." Julian hesitated. He looked back at me. I was sitting in my armchair now, staring blankly at the carpet, playing the part of a man whose mind was gone. My heart was turning to absolute ice in my chest. I watched my son weigh the options. He was looking at his father, a man who had sacrificed his entire youth for him, and balancing my health against the convenience of keeping my money in his pocket.
Hi, Mr. Grocer.
Okay. Julian finally breathed out his cowardice, winning the battle. Call the private doctor. Tell him to get here as soon as possible. I sat there in the silence, listening to Chloe dial her phone. They thought they had just secured their victory. They thought this private, corrupt doctor was going to hand them the keys to my kingdom. They did not know that the audio recorder hidden deep in the pocket of my wool cardigan was currently capturing every single word of their conspiracy. The antique grandfather clock in the hallway ticked with a heavy rhythmic thud. Each second felt like a hammer striking the final nails into the coffin of my family. I sat slumped deep into the cushions of my worn armchair, my chin resting on my chest, my eyes staring blankly at the faded patterns of the living room rug. To anyone walking into the room, I looked like an empty shell of a man, a mind lost to the cruel ravages of time. But beneath that carefully constructed facade, my senses were sharper than they had been in decades. My right hand was buried deep inside the pocket of my thick wool cardigan, my thumb resting gently but firmly against the cold, hard plastic of a digital voice recorder. Julian was pacing near the front window. His expensive leather shoes squeaked slightly against the hardwood floor. He kept running his hands over his face, breathing in short, shallow gasps. He was a coward trying to convince himself that he was making a difficult but necessary medical decision for his ailing father. But we both knew the truth. He was trading my freedom for his financial survival. Chloe, on the other hand, was perfectly still. She sat on the edge of the sofa, her posture rigid, her eyes glued to her phone screen. She was not nervous. She was impatient. When the doorbell finally rang, Julian flinched as if he had been slapped. Chloe immediately stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from her designer skirt. "I will get it," she said, her voice completely devoid of any real concern. She walked to the front door and pulled it open. "Dr. Thorne, thank you so much for coming on such short notice," Chloe said, her tone suddenly shifting into the soft, trembling voice of a worried family member. A man stepped into my living room. I kept my head down, observing him through the narrow slits of my half-closed eyes. Dr. Arthur Thorne did not look like a medical professional who spent his days caring for the elderly. He wore a sharp, tailored navy suit, a gold watch that caught the light of the living room lamps, and shoes that had never seen the sterile floors of a public hospital. He carried a sleek, black leather briefcase. He smelled of strong, expensive cologne and cheap, undeniable corruption. "It is no problem at all," Chloe the doctor replied. His use of her first name immediately told me everything I needed to know. This was not a random emergency call. They knew each other. This was a prearranged business transaction. Dr. Thorne walked over to Julian and extended a hand. "You must be the son." "Julian, I understand this is a very difficult time for your family. Watching a parent decline is never easy." Julian shook his hand weakly, his eyes darting toward me. "He has just been getting worse so fast. Doctor, yesterday he seemed fine, but today he put the television remote in the refrigerator. He asked for my mother, and she passed away 10 years ago. We do not know what to do anymore." "Let us take a look at him," Dr. Thorne said smoothly. He walked over and stood directly in front of my armchair. He did not crouch down to meet my eye level. He did not introduce himself. He did not pull out a stethoscope to check my heart rate, nor did he use a small light to check my pupil dilation. He simply stood over me, looking down at me as if I were a piece of broken furniture waiting to be thrown out onto the curb. "Desmond," the doctor said in a loud, patronizing voice like he was speaking to a toddler. "Can you hear me, Desmond?" I let my head loll slightly to the side. I blinked slowly, letting my mouth hang open just a fraction. I looked past him, staring at the blank wall behind his shoulder. "I am going to ask you a few simple questions." Desmond, Dr. Thorne continued, pulling a silver pen from his breast pocket and clicking it open. "First question, can you tell me what year it is?" I let out a low, raspy breath. I let a few seconds of heavy silence pass to build the illusion of a struggling mind. 1998. I mumbled, my voice weak and trembling. The doctor did not even blink. He made a quick dismissive check mark on a notepad he pulled from his briefcase. "All right, second question," he said, his tone incredibly bored. "Can you tell me who the current president is?" I furrowed my brow, pretending to strain my memory. "Reagan," I whispered. Another quick check mark. Julian let out a shaky breath behind him, muttering my name under his breath. Final question. Desmond, the doctor said, pointing his silver pen directly at Chloe, who was standing a few feet away with her arms crossed. Do you know who this woman is? I slowly turned my head toward my daughter-in-law. I looked at her expensive clothes, her perfectly styled hair, and the cold, calculating greed burning in her pale eyes. I let a vacant smile spread across my face. She is the nurse, I said softly. She brings me my tea. Dr. Thorne clicked his pen shut and slid it back into his pocket. He did not ask me to count backwards from 10. He did not ask me to draw the face of a clock. He did not conduct a single legitimate cognitive test. The entire medical examination had lasted less than 2 minutes. He turned his back to me and faced Julian and Chloe. His expression was completely composed, wearing the mask of a seasoned professional delivering tragic news. I am very sorry, Julian, Dr. Thorne said, his voice dripping with rehearsed sympathy. But the signs are undeniable. Your father is exhibiting textbook symptoms of stage 2 dementia, likely exacerbated by a rapid onset cognitive decline. He is completely detached from reality. Julian rubbed his eyes, leaning heavily against the back of the sofa. Is there any medication? Anything we can do to fix this? The doctor shook his head slowly. At this stage, medication will only manage his agitation. He is completely incapable of making rational decisions. He cannot be trusted to manage his own finances, his property, or his health. If left unsupervised, he is a severe danger to himself. You need to establish legal guardianship over him immediately. He requires 24-hour care, preferably in a secure, specialized facility. My thumb pressed hard against the record button in my pocket. I was capturing every single syllable of this fraudulent diagnosis. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up, grab this corrupt doctor by the collar of his expensive suit, and throw him out the front door. The sheer audacity of these people casually erasing my humanity and my legal rights in less than 2 minutes made my blood boil, but I kept my body entirely still. I breathed softly. The trap was not fully closed yet. Julian, Chloe said gently, walking over to her husband and placing a hand on his shoulder. You look incredibly pale. Why do you not go into the kitchen and make yourself a cup of coffee? Or better yet, step outside onto the back patio and get some fresh air. Dr. Thorne and I can discuss the preliminary paperwork. You need a minute to process this. Julian nodded numbly. He looked at me one last time, a brief flash of guilt crossing his face before he turned and walked out the back door, closing it softly behind him. The moment the latch clicked shut, the entire atmosphere in the living room transformed. Well, that was easy enough, the doctor said. Well, that was easy enough, the doctor said, keeping his voice low. He is out of it. Chloe walked over to the front window, glancing out to make sure the street was clear, then turned back to the doctor. Do you have the certification documents ready? My lawyer needs them by tomorrow morning to file the emergency petition for the power of attorney. I have them right here, Dr. Thorne said, tapping his black leather briefcase. Fully signed and notarized by my clinic. It formally declares Desmond Holloway mentally unfit and highly recommends the immediate transfer of his estate control to his next of kin. It is bulletproof. No judge in this county will question my signature. Excellent, Chloe whispered, a sharp, triumphant smile spreading across her face. However, the doctor added, raising an eyebrow. I believe we agreed on a consulting fee for this specific house call. I am putting my medical license on the line for this favor, Chloe. I know, Arthur. Do not worry. I watched through the blur of my eyelashes as Chloe reached into her designer handbag. She pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope. She did not hesitate. She walked over and handed it directly to the doctor. $10,000 in untraceable cash. Exactly as you asked, Chloe said, her voice completely cold and businesslike. Count it if you want, but it is all there. I took it out of a secondary credit account. Dr. Thorne took the envelope. I could hear the distinct heavy rustle of the thick stack of bills inside. He did not bother to count it. He simply opened his briefcase, slipped the envelope of cash inside, and pulled out a blue medical folder. A pleasure doing business with you, Chloe, the doctor murmured, handing her the blue folder. Once the judge grants the guardianship, you can move him into whatever facility you want and liquidate the house. Just make sure my name stays strictly on the medical evaluation and out of any financial disputes. You have nothing to worry about, Chloe replied, clutching the folder tightly against her chest like it was a winning lottery ticket. Once we sell this property, the old man will be out of our hair permanently. Dr. Thorne picked up his briefcase, gave me one last dismissive glance, and walked out the front door, leaving into the quiet suburban afternoon. I sat in my armchair perfectly still, letting my blank stare remain fixed on the wall. Inside my pocket, the digital recorder captured the sound of the door closing, the rustling of the fraudulent medical documents in Chloe's hands, and her quiet, victorious laugh. She thought she had just purchased my entire life for $10,000. She thought she had outsmarted a helpless old man. But as I sat there, feeling the solid weight of the audio recorder in my palm, I knew the truth. They had just handed me the very weapon I needed to destroy them. The medical charade was over. The real execution was about to begin. The house was completely dark except for the warm yellow light spilling from the kitchen doorway into the narrow hallway. It was just past 9 in the evening. I was supposed to be fast asleep in my bedroom, heavily sedated by the poisoned tea my daughter-in-law had so generously prepared for me earlier. But the pills she thought she had crushed into my mug were currently resting in the soil of Vivian's favorite potted plant. I was wide awake, and I was listening. I slipped out of my bedroom, moving with the quiet precision of a man who knew every single creaking floorboard in this old house. 45 years of walking these halls meant I could navigate them completely blindfolded. I pressed my back against the cool plaster of the hallway wall, inching my way toward the kitchen. The sound of a wine cork popping echoed through the quiet house, followed by the clinking of expensive crystal glasses. They had brought their own champagne to celebrate. They were drinking a toast to my supposed mental demise right in the middle of my own home. To Dr. Thorne, Chloe said, her voice bubbling with arrogant triumph, that greedy little man was worth every single penny of that $10,000 bribe. I cannot believe how easy it was, Julian. Your father just sat there drooling like an absolute idiot. We have the medical certification. The lawyer will file the emergency guardianship papers first thing on Monday morning. By Wednesday, we will have total legal control over this property. I heard Julian let out a long, heavy exhale. It sounded like relief, but there was a tremor of nervous energy beneath it. I know, Chloe, he replied, taking a loud sip of his drink. I just want this to be over. Watching him sit there staring at the wall, it was hard. But it is for the best. Once we sell this place, we can finally pay off that $150,000 loan for your boutique. We can finally breathe again. The stress has been killing me. There was a sudden chilling silence in the kitchen. The celebratory clinking of glasses stopped completely. About that, Julian, Chloe said. Her voice had lost its celebratory bounce. It was suddenly very tight, very careful. About what Julian asked, his tone shifting instantly from relieved to suspicious. We agreed. We sell the house, we pay off your boutique debt, and we use the rest to get our lives back on track. Chloe took a deep breath. I could picture her standing by the kitchen island, nervously tracing the rim of her champagne glass. The debt is not exactly $150,000, Julian. What are you talking about? My son demanded, his voice rising in panic. You showed me the bank statements last month. You said the boutique was behind on inventory payments and the business loan. I lied, Chloe stated, her voice dropping to a harsh, desperate whisper. The boutique has been bleeding money for 2 years. The bank cut me off completely last November, but I needed to keep up appearances. I needed to maintain the lifestyle, the inventory, the country club memberships. So I had to find alternative funding. Alternative funding. Julian repeated, the horror creeping into his throat. Chloe, what did you do? I took out a hard money loan, she confessed rapidly, the words tumbling out in a panic. From private lenders. Dangerous people, Julian. People who do not send polite letters in the mail when you miss a payment. And I did not just borrow $150,000, I borrowed $500,000. $500,000, Julian gasped, his voice cracking loudly in the quiet kitchen. Are you out of your mind? How could you even secure a loan that massive without me knowing? The bank would never approve that. I did not use a bank, Chloe hissed back, her desperation turning into anger. And I secured it by leveraging our house, Julian. I secretly took out a second mortgage on our estate. I forged your signature on the guarantor documents. I stood frozen in the dark hallway, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. The sheer magnitude of her deception was staggering. She had not just ruined her own business, she had secretly gambled away their entire life. She had forged my son's signature to take $500,000 from dangerous loan sharks, putting a target directly on their backs. You forged my signature, Julian choked out, sounding like he could not breathe. You mortgaged our home to criminals. Chloe, we are going to lose everything. They are going to take the house. You could go to federal prison for fraud. That is exactly why we need your father's house. Chloe snapped, her voice turning vicious and defensive. The men I borrowed from are running out of patience. They sent someone to the boutique yesterday. A man in a suit who quietly told me that if I do not have their $500,000 by the end of the month, they will take it out of our physical well-being. They know where we live, Julian. They know where we sleep. I did what I had to do to survive. This is insanity, Julian cried, pacing the kitchen floor. We are stealing my father's house to pay off the mob. This is completely insane. We are surviving, Chloe corrected him sharply. Your father is an old man with one foot in the grave. He does not need a $400,000 house. He does not need anything. We need this money to keep us out of prison and to keep those loan sharks from breaking our legs. We sell his house, we pay off the men, and we clear the debt on our estate. It is the only way out, Julian. It is the only way. I closed my eyes in the darkness of the hallway. My chest ached with a profound, suffocating grief. For 45 years, I had loved that boy. I had carried him on my shoulders when he was a toddler. I had worked double shifts at the auto plant so he could have a new bicycle for Christmas. I had taught him how to tie his shoes, how to drive a car, how to be a man. I waited in the silence, praying to a God I hoped was listening. I prayed that my son would finally draw the line. I prayed he would look at his wife and tell her that stealing his father's life to cover her criminal debts was a bridge he would never cross. I prayed he would choose me. Julian stopped pacing. The kitchen was deathly quiet. Fine, Julian finally whispered. His voice was completely hollow, stripped of any moral fiber. We will do it. The last remaining piece of my broken heart shattered into dust. He had chosen. Good. Chloe sighed, the relief washing over her words. We need to move fast. The moment the judge signs the guardianship papers on Wednesday, we list this house for a quick cash sale. We will price it below market value to get it closed in 10 days. What about my dad? Julian asked. The question was not born of love or concern. It was a logistical problem he wanted to solve. Just put him in the cheapest nursing home in the suburbs, Julian said, coldly sealing his own fate with every word. Find one of those state-funded places way out past the city limits. I do not care what it looks like. Just make sure it is cheap so it does not eat into the profits from the house sale. And Chloe, make sure you drain his bank cards first. Take his pension money, empty his checking account, take whatever pathetic savings he has left. We are going to need every single penny to cover the remaining interest on your debt. Do not leave him a dime. Consider it done. Chloe agreed, her voice practically purring with satisfaction. We will clear out his accounts tomorrow morning before we start packing up his things. I did not need to hear another word. I stepped away from the kitchen door and moved silently back down the dark hallway to my bedroom. I closed the door without making a sound and sat on the edge of my bed. The sorrow that had gripped me just moments ago completely vanished. It evaporated into the cold night air, replaced by a deep, absolute, and terrifying clarity. My son was dead to me. The boy I had raised had been completely consumed by greed, cowardice, and a woman who was willing to throw me to the wolves to save her own skin. They wanted to steal the roof over my head. They wanted to lock me away in a miserable facility and drain my accounts. They thought they were dealing with a fragile, helpless old man who had nothing but a meager pension and a decaying suburban home. They had no idea that the man they were trying to rob was a commercial real estate titan worth $45 million. They had no idea that I held the controlling shares in the very trust fund that managed the mortgage on their luxurious estate. They had no idea that they were playing a high-stakes game of financial chess against a grandmaster. I reached into the pocket of my cardigan and pulled out the digital audio recorder. I pressed the stop button. The tiny red light turned off. I had everything I needed. I had the fake doctor's evaluation. I had Chloe's confession to massive financial fraud and forgery. I had Julian's explicit instructions to steal my money and dump me in a cheap facility. I placed the recorder securely inside my bedside drawer. Tomorrow, they were going to start packing my belongings. Tomorrow, they were going to invite Chloe's arrogant middle-class parents over to gloat over my supposed downfall. Let them come, let them laugh, let them pack my bags. I was going to play the helpless victim right up until the very last second, and then I was going to drop the sky right on their heads. They wanted to know what it felt like to be ruthless. I was about to show them exactly how ruthless a heartbroken father could be. The heavy sound of tires crushing the gravel in my driveway pulled me from my thoughts. It was Saturday morning, barely 48 hours after the disastrous birthday dinner. I was sitting in my old recliner wearing a faded plaid button-down shirt and a pair of worn-out slippers. I heard car doors slamming outside. Through the sheer curtains, I saw a leased silver Lexus parked right behind Chloe's SUV. Two figures stepped out into the morning light. It was Richard and Patricia Harding, Chloe's parents. I had met the Hardings only a handful of times over the years. They were the epitome of suburban snobbery, a white middle-class couple who moved through the world with their noses pointed firmly at the sky. They wore golf clothes on days they did not play golf. They spoke loudly in restaurants, complained about the service everywhere they went, and always made sure everyone in the room knew they owned a boat, even if it was just a small pontoon they rarely used. From the very first day Julian introduced them to me, they had treated me with a barely concealed layer of condescension. To them, I was just Julian's father, the old black mechanic who somehow managed to scrape by in a neighborhood that was rapidly gentrifying. I heard the front door open. Chloe led them into my living room. Patricia walked in first, holding a designer handbag tightly against her chest, as if she were afraid the very air in my house might stain it. She looked around at my sturdy antique furniture and wrinkled her nose in obvious disgust. Richard followed close behind, his hands stuffed into the pockets of his tailored slacks. He looked around my home with the greedy, calculating eyes of a pawnshop owner appraising a stolen watch. Julian was trailing behind them, looking entirely defeated. He stood near the doorway, completely overshadowed by his wife and his in-laws. I kept my eyes fixed on the television screen, which was playing a muted rerun of an old western. I let my mouth hang open slightly. I made sure my left hand was trembling as it rested on the arm of my chair. I was giving them the exact version of Desmond Holloway they wanted to see. A broken, helpless old man whose mind was slipping away into the fog of dementia. Desmond Richards' voice boomed across the living room, overly loud and offensively cheerful, as if he were speaking to a deaf toddler. "Look who came to visit. Patricia and I wanted to check on you. Chloe told us you have been having a rough time lately." I slowly turned my head toward him, blinking several times to simulate confusion. I let out a low, shaky breath. Richard I mumbled, "Patricia, what a surprise. Please find a seat." Patricia glanced at my floral-patterned sofa, visibly shuddering before perching herself on the very edge of the cushion. Richard did not sit. He paced around my living room, running his fingers over the wooden mantel of my fireplace. He was already treating the house as if it belonged to him. "We heard the tragic news about your health," Desmond, Patricia said, her voice dripping with toxic fake sympathy. "Chloe told us the doctor came to see you. It must be so frightening for you, losing your memory, not knowing what is going on around you. But you are so lucky to have our daughter to step in and handle things." I nodded slowly, keeping my eyes wide and vacant. "I am just so tired," I whispered. "Everything is so confusing lately." Richard stopped pacing and stood directly in front of my chair, blocking my view of the television. He looked down at me, and the fake smile vanished from his face. The true nature of his visit was about to reveal itself. He was not there to offer comfort. He was there to close the deal his daughter had started. "Let us speak plainly, Desmond," Richard said, his tone dropping its cheerful facade and becoming sharp and authoritative. "We all know what is happening here. Your mind is going. Your finances are a mess. The government is breathing down your neck for unpaid taxes. You are sitting in a house that is falling apart in a neighborhood where property values are soaring." I looked up at him, widening my eyes as if I were terrified. Richard leaned in closer, his voice dropping into a sneer of pure, unfiltered arrogance. He let his true colors shine through, stripping away any pretense of respect. "Mr. Holloway, let us be honest. For people like you, living in a neighborhood like this is simply too much. You are completely out of your depth. You cannot afford it, and you certainly cannot manage it. It is time to let the adults take over. Just sign the power of attorney papers for Julian and Chloe. Go to the state nursing home, relax, and enjoy being with your own kind. We will take care of liquidating this property and handling the mess you created. Your own kind." The words hung in the quiet living room like a foul stench. It was the ultimate insult. He was stripping away my dignity, reducing my 45 years of hard work, my marriage, and my entire existence down to a racist, classist stereotype. He truly believed he was a superior being standing over a lesser creature. My chest burned with a rage so intense it felt like liquid fire. My knuckles ached with the desire to stand up, grab him by his expensive cashmere collar, and throw him headfirst through my front window. I wanted to look him in the eye and tell him that the man he just insulted could buy his entire pathetic life 10 times over without checking a bank balance. But I am a master of discipline. I forced my hand to continue its pathetic manufactured trembling. I looked down at the floor, acting as though his cruel words had completely broken my spirit. I am just so tired, I repeated softly, letting my voice crack perfectly. I think I need to lie down. My head hurts. Julian finally stepped forward, placing a hand on Richard's arm. Okay, Richard, that is enough. Let him rest. Come on, Dad, let me help you to your room. Julian gently pulled me up from the chair. I leaned heavily against him, shuffling my feet across the hardwood floor. As we walked down the hallway, I played the part of the defeated victim flawlessly. Julian helped me onto my bed and pulled the quilt over my legs. He did not look me in the eye. He just muttered a quiet apology under his breath and walked back down the hallway to join his wife and her dreadful parents. The moment my bedroom door clicked shut, my frail demeanor vanished. I sat up on the edge of the mattress, my posture straight, my mind razor sharp. I slipped off my shoes and walked silently in my socks toward the bedroom door. I pressed my ear against the cool wood. The sound of footsteps moved from the living room into the kitchen. I slowly turned the brass knob of my door and opened it just a crack. The kitchen was at the end of the hall, and their voices carried perfectly down the narrow corridor. What I heard next revealed a layer of corruption that even I had not anticipated. "You were too harsh on him, Dad," Chloe hissed, her voice filled with anxious tension. "We need him compliant, not terrified. If he gets too scared, he might refuse to sign the final transfer forms when the notary gets here." "He is a weak old man, Chloe." Richard fired back, his voice tight and angry. "You have to assert dominance with people like him. Besides, we do not have time to hold his hand. The bank called me again this morning. They are threatening to freeze my accounts by Friday." I held my breath, pressing my ear closer to the crack in the door. "I know, Dad, I know," Chloe said desperately. "But the paperwork takes time. The judge has to sign the guardianship order next week, and then we have to list the house. It will be at least a month before we see any cash from this property." "A month is too long." Patricia's voice chimed in shrill and panicky. "Chloe, you promised us this would be quick. We are drowning here. Our country club dues are 6 months in arrears. The second mortgage on our house is in default. If the neighbors find out we are broke, we will be ruined in our social circle. We need our cut of this house sale immediately." I closed my eyes in the dark hallway, a cold, calculating smile spreading across my face. The puzzle was finally complete. The magnificent, wealthy Harding family was completely broke. They were drowning in debt, suffocating under the weight of their own fake, glamorous lifestyle. They were not just here to support their daughter. They were co-conspirators. They were planning to chop up my $400,000 house like a piece of meat to pay off their country club memberships and their defaulted mortgages. The entire family was a pack of starving vultures circling what they thought was a dying animal. We agreed on a 50-50 split. Richard demanded, his voice dropping into a vicious growl. "You and Julian take $200,000 to pay off your loan sharks, and Patricia and I take $200,000 to save our estate. Do not think you can back out of this deal, Chloe. We are the ones who paid for the fake doctor to come here yesterday. We financed your little operation. You owe us." "I will get you your money, Dad," Chloe snapped back. "Just let me handle the old man. I have the papers ready. I will get him to sign the initial transfers tomorrow, and we will move him to the county facility by the weekend. Just keep your mouth shut and let me work." I quietly closed my bedroom door. The sheer scale of their greed was breathtaking. It was a massive, tangled web of lies, fraud, and desperation. Chloe had mortgaged her house to criminals. Her parents were facing financial ruin. And Julian, my cowardly son, was standing in the middle of it all, letting a family of broke con artists cannibalize his father's life. They thought they had me cornered. They thought I was going to quietly sign away my home and ride off into the sunset in a miserable nursing home so they could divide my bones among themselves. I walked over to the window and looked out at the street. The sun was shining brightly over the quiet neighborhood. I pulled my phone from my pocket and typed a quick message to Sterling, my attorney. They are all in on it. The parents are bankrupt too. Accelerate the timeline. I want the final hammer ready to drop by Thursday night. I hit send. I did not feel sorrow anymore. I did not feel grief for the son I had lost. I only felt the cold, hard certainty of justice. They wanted my money. They wanted to steal my home to save their pathetic, fraudulent lives. But they had made one fatal miscalculation. They forgot to check who actually owned the bank that was coming to collect their debts. The next morning brought a heavy driving rain that battered against the windows of my old house. It was the kind of gray, dreary day that perfectly matched the dark intentions of the people who were actively trying to destroy me. I was sitting in my favorite armchair with a cup of lukewarm tea resting on the side table, waiting for the next act of their theatrical performance to begin. I did not have to wait long. Promptly at 10 in the morning, the front door swung open. Chloe stepped inside, shaking her wet umbrella onto my hardwood floor without a single ounce of respect for my home. She wore a sharp charcoal business suit today, looking less like a caring daughter-in-law and more like a corporate liquidator coming to gut a bankrupt company. Tucked tightly under her arm was a thick leather binder. "Good morning, Desmond," she called out with her voice echoing in the quiet house. "I brought some fresh pastries from the bakery downtown." She walked into the living room and set a small white paper bag on the coffee table. I did not care about the pastries. My eyes were fixed entirely on the leather binder she placed carefully right next to them. I let my hands tremble as I reached for my tea, making sure the cup rattled loudly against the saucer. "Good morning, Chloe," I said, making my voice deliberately weak and raspy. "You are out early today. Where is Julian?" "Oh, Julian had to go into the office early to deal with a crisis," she lied smoothly while taking a seat on the sofa opposite me. "But I wanted to come by and check on you. Plus, we have a little bit of administrative paperwork to take care of today. Nothing to worry about, just some standard forms." I tilted my head, looking at the binder with manufactured confusion. "Paperwork," I murmured. "I thought Julian was handling the tax office problem." "He is Desmond," she said, leaning forward with an expression of deep manufactured empathy. "He is working so hard on that for you. But to make sure you are fully protected, especially after the doctor came to see you, we need to update your health insurance profile. The state requires some updated signatures so we can get you into a premium care program. We just want to make sure that whatever happens, you have the absolute best medical coverage possible." The sheer audacity of her lie was almost impressive. She sat there in my living room looking me right in my eyes, telling me she was securing my medical future while actively trying to steal the roof over my head. I looked deeply into her pale blue eyes, searching for even a tiny sliver of guilt or a fleeting moment of hesitation. There was absolutely nothing. She was completely hollow inside, acting as a vessel filled only with greed and desperation. "Health insurance," I repeated slowly, letting my lower lip quiver just a bit. "Insurance is so complicated these days. Vivian always used to handle the insurance paperwork. I do not understand all those big words." "You do not need to understand them, Desmond," Chloe said, with her voice taking on a sickeningly soothing tone. It was the exact kind of voice you would use to coax a child into taking bitter medicine. "That is what Julian and I are here for. We did all the hard work reading through it. All you need to do is sign at the bottom of the pages where I put the yellow sticky notes." She unzipped the leather binder and pulled out a stack of crisp, thick legal documents. She placed them on the coffee table and smoothed them out with her perfectly manicured hands. I leaned forward, squinting my eyes as if I were struggling to focus on the text. I have read thousands of legal contracts in my lifetime. When you build a commercial real estate empire worth $45 million, you learn exactly how to spot a bad deal from a mile away. It took me less than 2 seconds to read the bold print at the very top of the first page. It did not say a single word about health insurance. It clearly read, "Quitclaim deed and transfer of property." Beneath that heading was a sweeping, irrevocable release of assets. By signing this specific document, the owner was entirely surrendering all rights, all titles, and all interest in the property directly to Julian and Chloe. They had even included a malicious little clause surrendering control of my personal banking accounts to cover administrative property costs. They were not just taking the house. They were emptying my pockets on the way out. I kept my face perfectly blank, masking the absolute disgust churning in my stomach. "This is a lot of paper, Chloe," I mumbled, rubbing my temples in fake distress. "Maybe I should wait for Julian to come home. I prefer when my son explains these things to me." Chloe stiffened immediately. The sweet facade cracked for a fraction of a second, revealing the panicked, desperate woman underneath. "Desmond Julian is incredibly stressed right now," she said, with her voice dropping an octave and becoming sharp and urgent. "He is working overtime to save this house from the tax collectors. If we delay this health insurance application, you might lose your coverage completely. You do not want to put more of a burden on your son, do you? You need to do this for him." She was using my love for my son as a psychological weapon against me. It was a masterful, evil manipulation. I let out a heavy, dramatic sigh, slumping my shoulders in utter defeat. "Okay," I whispered softly. "I do not want to be a burden. Where do I sign?" Chloe smiled, a genuine, terrifying smile of pure victory. She quickly uncapped an expensive black fountain pen and pressed it into my trembling hand. "Right here," she said, pointing to the line marked with a yellow arrow. "And on the next 3 pages as well." I held the pen, letting my hand shake violently. As I looked down at the signature line, I thought about the secure phone conversation I had with Sterling, my private attorney, late last night. When they present the transfer documents, Sterling had advised me over the phone, do not refuse to sign. If you refuse, they will know you are highly lucid. They will panic and try to forge it themselves, which creates a messy legal headache for our side. "You need to sign it, Mr. Holloway, but you must execute a defective signature." What exactly is a defective signature, I had asked him. "It is a signature that clearly and legally invalidates the entire document," Sterling explained. "Do not use your legal name. Alter your middle initial, misspell your last name, and use a completely different cursive stroke. In the eyes of the law, a document signed under false pretenses, with a deliberately incorrect signature by a person claiming cognitive distress, is not just void. It is ironclad proof of attempted fraud by the party presenting it. You give them the rope, and they will gladly tie the noose themselves." I took a deep breath, completing my performance of the frightened old man. I pressed the nib of the fountain pen to the thick paper. I did not write Desmond Holloway. I let my hand jerk and drag across the page. I wrote the name Darnell Holloway, replacing the letter O in my last name with an A, and completely omitting my middle initial. I made the cursive look childish, erratic, and utterly unrecognizable from the crisp, authoritative signature I normally used to sign million-dollar commercial leases. I repeated this deliberately flawed signature on the next 3 pages, making sure my hand kept shaking the entire time. When I finished the last page, I let the pen slip from my fingers and drop onto the coffee table. There, I mumbled, wiping my brow. "Is that enough, Chloe? Are we safe now?" Chloe did not even look closely at the signatures. She was far too blinded by her own greed and too eager to secure the massive prize. She snatched the papers off the table with lightning speed, tapping them against the wood to align the edges before shoving them violently back into her leather binder. She zipped it shut with a loud final sound. "Yes, Desmond," she said, standing up quickly, unable to hide the absolute thrill vibrating through her entire body. "You did perfectly. We are all safe now. Julian and I will take it from here. You just rest." She did not offer me a pastry. She did not ask if I needed anything else. She had gotten exactly what she came for, and I was no longer useful to her. She practically sprinted to the front door with her heels clicking rapidly against the floorboards. "I will see you soon, Desmond," she called out without looking back. She pulled the door shut, locking me inside what she now believed was her newly acquired property. I sat in the quiet living room listening to the engine of her luxury vehicle start up and speed away down the wet street. The sound of the rain against the window suddenly felt peaceful and cleansing. I reached over, picked up the white paper bag she had left behind, and tossed it directly into the trash bin. Chloe truly thought she had just outsmarted me. She thought she was driving away with the deed to my home, the key to paying off her violent loan sharks, and the total salvation of her pathetic, fraudulent lifestyle. She was probably calling her broke parents right now, telling them they were rich. She was probably calling Julian, telling him the old man was finally out of the way. She had absolutely no idea that the papers inside her leather binder were completely worthless. She had no idea that by forcing me to sign them under the guise of health insurance, she had just committed a major federal felony. She did not know that her every deceitful word had been recorded by the device sitting deep in my pocket. I leaned back in my armchair and took a slow, calm sip of my tea. They thought they were preparing my exile. They thought they were building a permanent cage to lock me away in some forgotten cheap nursing home. But the cage was actually for them. The heavy iron doors were already closing, the locks were turning, and they were the ones standing blindly on the inside. The weekend arrived with a heavy, oppressive atmosphere that hung over the house like a thick fog. I was seated in my usual spot in the living room recliner, maintaining the quiet, vacant stare of a man who no longer understood the world around him. I did not have to wait long for the invasion to begin. The loud crunch of tires on my gravel driveway announced their arrival. The front door swung open violently, and Julian and Chloe marched inside. They were not carrying groceries or checking on my health. They were carrying large rolls of heavy-duty black contractor trash bags and a stack of flattened cardboard boxes. They looked like a demolition crew preparing to gut a condemned building. Chloe wore casual but expensive activewear, her hair tied back in a tight ponytail, her eyes scanning my living room with the cold efficiency of a vulture picking over bones. Julian avoided looking at me completely. He kept his eyes fixed on the floorboards, carrying the empty boxes into the center of the room. "We need to get this place cleared out. Julian." Chloe ordered, her voice completely devoid of any warmth or humanity. "The real estate agent wants to take listing photos by Tuesday. All this outdated junk has to go. Just bag it up and we will haul it to the local dump." Julian nodded slowly, unfolding a cardboard box. "Are you sure we should just throw it all away, Chloe?" he asked weakly. "Some of these things are antiques. Some of it belonged to my mother." Chloe let out a sharp, dismissive sigh. "Julian, nobody wants your mother's old, dusty junk. We are trying to sell a $400,000 property, not host a garage sale. We do not have the time or the space to store a bunch of worthless, sentimental garbage. Just start bagging the small stuff on the shelves while I clear out the kitchen cabinets." I sat perfectly still, my breathing shallow and even, watching the son I had raised dismantle my entire life right in front of my eyes. He did not argue with her. He simply opened a black garbage bag and walked over to the wooden bookshelf I had built with my own 2 hands 40 years ago. He began sweeping my possessions into the bag. He threw away the brass pocket watch I received when I retired from the auto plant. He threw away the vintage vinyl records that Vivian and I used to play on Sunday mornings. He did not pause to look at them. He did not hesitate. He just let them crash into the bottom of the plastic bag like worthless debris. But the true nightmare began when Chloe walked out of the kitchen and targeted the brick fireplace in the center of the living room. The wooden mantle above the fireplace was a sacred space in our home. It was the altar, where Vivian kept her most cherished memories. Chloe grabbed a black trash bag and started aggressively swiping things off the mantle. She knocked down the beautiful blue ceramic teapot Vivian had bought on our 10th anniversary. It hit the brick hearth and shattered into pieces. She did not even flinch. She just kicked the broken shards aside with the toe of her expensive sneaker. Then she picked up the hand-knitted quilt folded over the back of the sofa, the very quilt Vivian had knitted when she was pregnant with Julian, and stuffed it roughly into the garbage bag. Every movement she made was a deliberate erasure of my late wife. She was scrubbing Vivian's existence from the house, treating our 45 years of love and sacrifice as if it were an infectious disease that needed to be sanitized. I felt a crushing, suffocating weight in my chest. My hands gripped the armrests of my chair so tightly my knuckles ached. The hardest thing I have ever had to do in my entire 73 years on this earth was not standing up and throwing that woman out of my house. But I knew the trap required absolute patience. I had to let them show their true colors. I had to let them build the cage they thought they were designing for me. Then Chloe reached the center of the mantel. She picked up a heavy, ornate silver picture frame. Inside the frame was a black and white photograph of Vivian and me on our wedding day in 1970. We were standing on the steps of a small church in Detroit. I was wearing a rented suit, and Vivian was wearing a simple white dress she had sewn herself. We had absolutely no money, but the smiles on our faces held all the wealth in the world. It was my most prized possession. Chloe held the silver frame in her hands, turning it over to inspect the metal. Then she looked at the photograph inside and let out a cruel, mocking laugh. "Look at this, Julian," Chloe said, holding the frame up like a piece of disgusting evidence. "Your parents look like they just stepped out of a soup kitchen. Why does your father insist on holding on to this depressing reminder of how poor you all used to be? It is pathetic." Julian stopped packing his box and looked at the photograph. He looked at the image of his mother, the woman who had worked herself to the bone to make sure he never went to bed hungry. For a brief second, I thought I saw a flash of guilt cross his face. I thought he might finally step forward, take the picture from his wife, and tell her to show some basic human respect. But Julian just swallowed hard and looked away. "It is just an old picture, Chloe," he mumbled quietly. "Just put it in the box with his clothes. We can take it to the facility with him." "I am not packing this dirty thing," Chloe sneered. "The silver on this frame is completely tarnished anyway. It is worthless." Without another word, she carelessly tossed the heavy silver frame over her shoulder. She did not aim for a box or a bag. She just threw it blindly toward the fireplace. The frame hit the solid brick edge of the hearth. The sharp sound of the glass shattering violently echoed through the living room like a gunshot. The silver frame bounced and landed face down on the dusty floorboards. Shards of broken glass scattered everywhere. Julian flinched at the loud noise. "Chloe, what are you doing?" he asked nervously. "Oops," Chloe said, her voice dripping with extreme, unapologetic sarcasm. It slipped. "Just grab the broom, Julian, and sweep it into the trash. We do not have all day to cry over spilled milk. We have to take this first load of garbage to the county dump before they close." Julian did not argue. He tied the knot on his heavy black trash bag, hoisted it over his shoulder, and walked out the front door. Chloe grabbed her purse, stepped right over the broken glass and the photograph of my beautiful wife, and followed him outside. The heavy front door clicked shut. I was finally alone in the living room. The silence in the house was absolute and deafening. I slowly stood up from my recliner. My stooped posture vanished. My hands completely stopped their manufactured trembling. I walked over to the fireplace with slow, deliberate steps. I knelt down on the hardwood floor, ignoring the sharp pieces of broken glass that dug into the knees of my trousers. I reached out and gently picked up the photograph. The glass had shattered, but the picture of Vivian was miraculously untouched. I carefully brushed a fine layer of dust from her smiling face. I looked at the beautiful woman who had chosen to spend her life with a grease-stained mechanic. I looked at the woman who had loved our son unconditionally. I did not shed a single tear. Tears are a luxury for the helpless. Tears are for victims who have no other recourse. I was not a victim, and I was definitely not helpless. The sorrow that had been sitting heavy in my chest completely burned away, leaving behind a cold, supreme, and terrifying clarity. I stood up, holding the photograph safely in my left hand. I reached into my pocket with my right hand and pulled out my mobile phone. I dialed a highly encrypted number. It was the direct line to my private investigator, a former federal agent who handled the security and intelligence for all my commercial real estate holdings. He answered on the first ring. "Mr. Holloway," he said respectfully. "Listen to me carefully." I said, my voice low and completely devoid of any emotion. "I want you to initiate a total financial forensic audit on Chloe Harding and her fashion boutique immediately. I do not just want to know her current debts. I want to know exactly where the money is moving right now." "Understood," the investigator replied. "Do you suspect an imminent transaction? They just forced me to sign a highly defective transfer of property deed." I explained, my eyes scanning the empty spaces where my history had just been ripped away. "They believe they have secured my $400,000 house. They are confident. And when rats become confident, they move their stolen cheese. They are going to start shifting money from those fraudulent credit cards they opened in my name to pay off their loan sharks. I want you to trace every single wire transfer, every bank routing number, and every single digital footprint they leave behind. I will have a complete financial map of her boutique by tomorrow morning," the investigator promised. "We will know exactly where the stolen money is bleeding out." "Good," I replied coldly. "Track the cash flow. They are preparing their escape route, but I am preparing the iron cage, and I want to make sure the door slams shut the exact moment they step inside." I hung up the phone and looked down at the picture of Vivian one last time. I carefully placed the photograph in my breast pocket right over my heart. I looked around my ransacked living room at the trash bags filled with my life and at the broken glass scattered across the floor. They had just crossed a boundary that could never be uncrossed. They thought they had successfully destroyed an old man. They had absolutely no idea they had just summoned a hurricane. The final act was about to begin, and I was going to enjoy watching them drown. The sun had completely set, plunging my ransacked living room into deep shadows. I sat in the dark, illuminated only by the cold blue glow of my secure tablet. The email from my private investigator had arrived exactly when promised. The subject line was blank, but the encrypted attachment contained the entire financial anatomy of my daughter-in-law. I tapped the screen, entering my passcode, and watched as a labyrinth of numbers, bank statements, and wire transfers unfolded before my eyes. I scrolled through the first few pages, letting the sheer audacity of her crimes wash over me. Chloe had not just been waiting for me to sign away my house. She had been actively bleeding me dry for months. There, printed in undeniable black and white, were the records of 5 different premium credit cards. They were all opened under my name using my social security number and the pristine credit score I had maintained for half a century. She had intercepted my mail, redirected the digital statements to a hidden email address, and maxed out every single card. $80,000 in fraudulent charges. I tracked the flow of the stolen money. It was not going toward inventory for her failing boutique, nor was it paying for her luxury car leases. The money was hemorrhaging directly into offshore accounts and untraceable shell companies with generic names. Consulting firms and logistics groups that were nothing more than digital fronts for the violent loan sharks she had foolishly entangled herself with. She was frantically throwing buckets of my stolen money into a blazing inferno, desperately trying to keep the mob from breaking down the door of her pristine suburban mansion. I let out a low, dry laugh that echoed in the empty room. It was not a laugh of amusement. It was the sound of absolute chilling irony. I looked down at my hands in the blue light of the screen. Chloe always looked at these hands and saw nothing but grease and dirt. She saw a tired old black man who spent 40 years tightening bolts and breathing in exhaust fumes on the assembly line at the Detroit auto plants. She thought my entire existence was defined by minimum wage and a meager pension. She was a woman who judged the depth of an ocean by the foam on the surface. She did not know the history of these hands. 20 years ago, when the great auto plants filed for bankruptcy and the city was bleeding jobs by the thousands, everyone with a little bit of money fled to the suburbs. They abandoned the industrial sectors, leaving behind miles of empty factories, dirt lots, and shattered concrete. But Vivian and I did not run. We saw the ashes, and we understood that cities always rebuild. While my coworkers were spending their severance packages on new cars or drowning their sorrows in local bars, Vivian and I lived on rice and beans. We took every single penny we had ever saved, leveraged our clean credit, and quietly bought up acres of that abandoned commercial wasteland for absolute fractions of a penny on the dollar. We bought dirt. We bought ruins. And then the city revitalized. The developers came crawling back, desperate for land to build massive commercial hubs, corporate parks, and luxury shopping centers. They needed the land, and I owned the deeds. I did not just sell it back to them. I leased it. I partnered with them. I turned those forgotten toxic dirt lots into a sprawling commercial real estate empire. Today, that tired old mechanic she despised possesses a net worth of $45 million in liquid assets and unencumbered commercial properties. I built a fortune in absolute silence because Vivian and I knew that invisible wealth is a shield, while flashy money is a target. I swiped the tablet screen, moving to the 4th page of the investigator report. This page detailed the original legitimate debts Chloe and Julian held before she panicked and went to the criminal underworld. I looked at the primary mortgage on their $2 million estate. Then I looked at the commercial lease agreement for her failing fashion boutique. I stared at the name of the financial institution holding all of their legitimate debt. First Sterling Financial. I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes as a wave of supreme, almost poetic justice washed over me. First Sterling Financial was a prominent regional bank. What Chloe did not know, what Julian had never bothered to learn about his father, was that my private trust held the controlling shares of that exact bank branch. I was not just a customer. I was the majority shareholder. And her boutique, the glamorous little shop she bragged about to her wealthy friends, sat squarely in the center of a premium retail plaza owned entirely by D. Holloway, LLC, my holding company. The magnitude of her ignorance was staggering. She was forging documents, drugging my tea, and stealing pennies from my identity to save her pathetic lifestyle, completely unaware that she was robbing her own landlord and her own banker. She was trying to steal a $400,000 house from a man who literally owned the ground her business stood on and the very roof over her head. She thought she held all the cards because I had signed her fake property transfer with a trembling hand. She thought the trap was closed. She had absolutely no idea that I was the one who built the cage, and she had just eagerly locked herself inside. Tomorrow morning they were planning to call the private ambulance. They had the forged medical documents from their corrupt doctor. They had the fake property deed. They were going to pack my remaining clothes into a cheap plastic bag and ship me off to a state-run nursing facility on the edge of the county, leaving me to rot while they liquidated my life. I set the tablet face down on the coffee table. The game of shadows was over. It was time to step into the light. I picked up my phone and dialed Julian. He answered on the second ring, his voice tight and defensive. "Dad, it is late," Julian said. "You should be sleeping." Tomorrow is a big day. The medical transport is coming at noon to take you to the care facility. It is for your own good. I know, son, I said, keeping my voice soft, frail, and perfectly compliant. I know you and Chloe are just trying to take care of me. My mind is not what it used to be. I am ready to go. I heard him let out a long, heavy breath of relief. Good, Dad. That makes this a lot easier for everyone. But Julian, I added, pausing to let the weight of my request settle in. Before I go into the facility, before I lose whatever time I have left, I want us to have one last meal together. Just the family. You, me, Chloe, and her parents. I want to treat you all to a farewell dinner tomorrow night, to thank you for managing my affairs. Julian hesitated. I could hear the greed battling the guilt in his silence. He covered the receiver, muttering something to Chloe in the background. A moment later, he came back on the line. Okay, Dad, Julian agreed. Where do you want to go? LeBlanc, I said smoothly, naming the most exclusive, obscenely expensive French restaurant in the entire financial district. I want to go out with a little bit of dignity. I will use the last of my savings. Please tell Chloe and her parents to wear their very best. Perfect, Julian replied, entirely unable to resist a free luxury meal. We will see you tomorrow, Dad. I ended the call and tossed the phone onto the cushion beside me. They were so predictable. Their greed was a bottomless pit, blinding them to every red flag, every warning sign. They thought they were going to a celebratory dinner, a feast to toast their successful theft of an old man's life. They had no idea that they were getting dressed up for their own execution. The table was set, the evidence was secured, and the trap was perfectly primed. Tomorrow night at LeBlanc, the bill would finally come due, and they were going to pay with everything they had. The heavy rumble of a diesel engine vibrating through my front window told me it was exactly 11 o'clock in the morning. I did not need to look outside to know what was parked in my gravel driveway. It was not a regular city ambulance. It was a secure private transport van, the specific kind of vehicle they use for patients who are not expected to leave their homes voluntarily. My daughter-in-law had ordered a cage on wheels to haul me away. I was sitting in my living room, but I was not wearing my faded plaid shirt and old slippers. I had bathed early. I had shaved my face clean. I was dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal wool suit that I had not worn since Vivian passed away. My dress shoes were polished to a mirror shine. My posture was perfectly straight. Sitting in that armchair, I looked exactly like the man who quietly built a $45 million commercial real estate empire. I did not look anything like the senile, old, retired mechanic they thought they were institutionalizing today. The lock on the front door clicked open. Julian and Chloe walked in, followed closely by two large men wearing dark blue medical scrubs. One of the men was carrying a heavy folded wheelchair. Chloe was speaking in a hushed, exaggeratedly sympathetic tone to the transport medics. "He is right in the living room, gentlemen," she whispered loudly enough for me to hear. "Please be very careful with him. He has been highly unpredictable lately. He does not know where he is most of the time, so he might resist." Julian walked into the living room first. He stopped dead in his tracks. The fake, sorrowful expression on his face melted into absolute confusion. Chloe walked in right behind him and froze. The confident, arrogant stride she had when she entered the house completely vanished. "Dead," Julian stammered, staring wide-eyed at my pristine suit. "Why are you dressed like that?" I did not let my hands tremble. I did not stare blankly at the wall. I looked directly into my son's eyes with a gaze so sharp and focused it made him physically take a step backward. "I am dressed for an occasion." "Julian," I said. My voice was deep, steady, and completely devoid of the pathetic frailty I had been feeding them for the past week. Chloe's breath hitched in her throat. She looked at me, then looked back at the medics. Panic instantly flared in her pale blue eyes. "Julian," she hissed frantically. "He is having a manic episode. He does not know what he is doing. Tell the men to put him in the chair right now." I stood up. I did not struggle or lean heavily on the armrests for support. I rose smoothly to my full height, towering over the center of the room. I slowly buttoned my suit jacket and looked directly at the two medics. "Gentlemen," I said calmly and clearly, "if either of you takes one single step closer to me with that wheelchair, I will have my attorneys file kidnapping and false imprisonment charges against you and your employer before the sun goes down. I am in full possession of my mental faculties, and I am not leaving my own house against my will." The medics stopped immediately. They looked at me standing there in my tailored suit, speaking with absolute authority. Then they looked angrily at Chloe. "Ma'am," one of the medics said, stepping back toward the front door, This man is clearly lucid and aware of his surroundings. We cannot legally transport a competent adult without a direct court order or a police escort. We are leaving. They folded the wheelchair, grabbed their equipment, and walked out of the house. The heavy front door slammed shut, leaving Julian and Chloe stranded in the middle of my living room. Chloe's face was flushed with red-hot anger. She took a threatening step toward me, dropping her sweet daughter-in-law act completely. "What kind of sick game is this, Desmond?" she demanded, raising her voice. "You signed the medical release papers. We have the doctor's official evaluation. You are legally required to go to the care facility." "Yes, the evaluation from Dr. Thorne," I replied smoothly, letting her know that I remembered the corrupt doctor's name perfectly. $10,000 is a very steep price for a fake medical diagnosis, Chloe. Both of them looked entirely bewildered. The color drained from Julian's face as he realized I knew exactly what they had done. "You are not going to fight us," Julian repeated, his voice barely a terrified whisper. He thought I was about to call the police right then and there. "No," I said, slowly stepping around the coffee table to close the distance between us. "I am not going to fight you. I know exactly what you both want. You want this house. You want my bank accounts. You want me out of the way so you can pay off your massive debts. And I have decided to give you exactly what you desire. I will go to the care facility voluntarily. I will let you manage the estate, but I am going to do it entirely on my own terms." Chloe crossed her arms defensively, still staring at me like I was a ghost. "What terms?" she asked suspiciously. "Before I surrender my freedom and move into a sterile little room for the rest of my life, I want one last evening with my family," I said, keeping my tone even and measured. "I want a proper farewell dinner. I have already made a reservation for 5 people at LeBlanc for 8 o'clock tonight." "You mean Julian and your parents, Chloe? We are not going to a fancy French dinner." Chloe scoffed, immediately rejecting the idea. "We do not have time for this nonsense. You are going to the facility today." I smiled. It was a cold, calculating smile that made Julian flinch. "That would be a very poor financial decision, Chloe," I said softly. "You see, I have one final gift to give you tonight. A gift I was originally planning to take to my grave. But since I am handing over my life to you today, I might as well hand over the rest of my hidden assets." I paused, letting the heavy silence build the tension in the room. During my time working at the auto plant, Vivian and I kept a secret safe deposit box at a private bank downtown. I lied, blending truth with fiction to create the perfect bait. Inside that box is Vivian's entire collection of vintage heirloom jewelry, along with a thick stack of high-yield bearer bonds I purchased back in the 1980s. It is worth a very substantial amount of untraceable cash, the exact kind of cash that could instantly wipe out a dangerous $500,000 debt. I watched Chloe's pale eyes dilate. Her rigid posture completely collapsed. The mere mention of untraceable cash and expensive jewelry was like a potent drug being injected directly into her veins. The loan sharks were breathing down her neck, threatening her life over her forged mortgages. She was drowning in a sea of criminal debt, and I had just thrown her a lifeline made of solid gold. She looked at Julian, her greedy mind racing at 1,000,000 miles an hour. The overwhelming greed completely overrode her natural caution. If this old man was offering them a hidden fortune, she could not risk angering him now. She could easily tolerate one fancy dinner if it meant getting her hands on enough untraceable wealth to save her from the mob. "A farewell dinner," Chloe said slowly, forcing her voice to sound reasonable and calm. "I suppose we owe you that much, Desmond. If you promise to cooperate with the transition tomorrow morning, we can certainly accommodate a family dinner tonight." Julian looked incredibly relieved that the immediate conflict was avoided and that he was about to get a free, luxury meal. "Tonight at LeBlanc," he agreed quickly. "We will be there, Dad. We will bring Richard and Patricia, just like you asked." "Perfect," I said softly. "Wear your absolute best clothes. It is going to be an unforgettable evening." They practically ran out of the house, eager to get ready for what they truly believed was their ultimate victory lap. The front door clicked shut, leaving me completely alone in the silent house. I walked over to the hallway mirror and looked at my reflection. The stooped, fragile old man they had been tormenting for weeks was completely gone forever. The man staring back at me was Desmond Holloway, the commercial real estate titan. They thought they were going to LeBlanc to feast on my remaining wealth. They thought they were going to sit across from me, drink expensive champagne, and politely collect the keys to my safe deposit box before locking me in a cage tomorrow morning. They had absolutely no idea that the dinner table was already rigged with explosives. I was not bringing them a gift. I was bringing them an execution. and I was going to make sure the entire city watched them burn. I stepped through the heavy brass and glass doors of LeBlanc exactly at 8 o'clock in the evening. The atmosphere inside was a masterclass in quiet, suffocating opulence. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, casting a warm golden glow over tables draped in immaculate white linen. A grand piano played softly in the corner, blending perfectly with the hushed, sophisticated murmurs of the city elite. It was the kind of restaurant where the menus did not list prices and the waitstaff moved like ghosts, completely silent and constantly observing. I was led to a large, semi-private alcove near the back of the dining room. I sat down, smoothed the lapels of my tailored charcoal suit, and waited. I did not have to wait long before the vultures descended. They arrived together, walking through the dining room as if they owned the very floorboards beneath their feet. Richard and Patricia Harding led the way, their noses tilted upward, practically radiating manufactured superiority. Richard wore a midnight blue suit that I knew he could no longer afford, and Patricia was draped in a silk dress and heavy pearl necklaces that she was probably planning to pawn by the end of the month. Chloe and Julian trailed closely behind them. Chloe looked triumphant, wearing a sharp, backless evening gown, acting like a queen walking toward her coronation. Julian just looked tired, keeping his eyes fixed straight ahead, avoiding my gaze completely. "Well, look at you, Desmond," Richard boomed as he took the seat directly across from me. He did not bother to hide the condescension in his voice. "All dressed up for the big transition. It is good to see you accepting reality with a little bit of dignity." I simply nodded, keeping my expression entirely neutral. "Good evening, Richard." "Patricia, thank you all for coming." Patricia let out a high-pitched artificial laugh as she settled into her plush velvet chair. "Oh, we would not miss it for the world, Desmond. We know how difficult this week has been for Julian and Chloe dealing with your little cognitive episodes. It takes a village to handle these tragic family matters. We are just here to support the kids." They did not waste a single second pretending this dinner was actually about honoring me. The moment the sommelier approached our table, the true nature of their gathering revealed itself. It was a feeding frenzy. Richard immediately took control of the wine list, ignoring me completely. "We will start with a bottle of the 1996 Bordeaux," he ordered smoothly, tossing the leather-bound book back to the sommelier. "And keep them coming. We have a lot to celebrate tonight." When the waiter returned to take our food orders, the absolute lack of shame was breathtaking. They ordered like people who had spent the last 6 months starving, desperate to taste the luxury they had been faking for so long. Richard ordered the Grand Seafood Tower imported beluga caviar and a bone and ribeye steak. Patricia ordered butter poached lobster tail with white truffles. Chloe requested the tasting menu complete with expensive artisan side dishes and an extra plate of seared scallops. Julian, my own son, ordered the dry, aged Wagyu beef, not once looking up from the table to ask what I might want. "And for you, sir," the waiter asked, turning to me with a polite, professional smile. I looked at the menu, then closed it gently. "I will just have the seasonal vegetable soup, please. And a glass of tap water." Chloe let out a sharp, mocking snort. "Just soup, Desmond. Come on, live a little. You are going to be eating pureed cafeteria food for the rest of your life starting tomorrow. You should fill up while you still can." "I am quite all right, Chloe," I replied softly. I have never had a very large appetite for excess. The contrast between us was stark, and they reveled in it. As the food began to arrive in endless waves of silver platters and fine china, they ate like ravenous animals. They gorged themselves on the caviar and the lobster, wiping butter from their lips while drinking glass after glass of the outrageously expensive wine. Throughout the entire 2-hour dinner, they talked over me, around me, and through me, as if I were a ghost haunting my own farewell party. They discussed their future plans with a sickening level of comfort. "I was thinking we completely gut the kitchen in your father's house before we list it," Chloe said to Julian, slicing into her scallops. "If we put in marble countertops and tear down that hideous brick fireplace, we can probably get an extra $50,000 from a cash buyer." Patricia nodded vigorously, chewing her lobster. "Absolutely. That house is a relic. The sooner you liquidate it, the sooner we can finalize our little financial arrangement. Speaking of which," she turned her eyes toward me, narrowing them like a predator. "Chloe mentioned you have a safe deposit box, Desmond. Something about vintage jewelry and bearer bonds. We should probably get those keys from you tonight just to make sure everything is safe and secure before the medical transport comes for you in the morning." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my water. "Do not worry about the keys, Patricia. Everything will be handed over exactly when it is supposed to be. Richard laughed, a loud, booming sound that drew annoyed glances from the neighboring tables. Listen to him, Julian. He still thinks he is in charge. It is almost sad. Do not worry, old man. You will be very comfortable at the county facility. Chloe made sure to pick a place with a nice little garden where you can sit and watch the grass grow. I did not respond. I simply continued eating my cheap, simple soup, watching them devour everything in sight. I watched the greed dripping from their mouths. I watched them toast to their brilliant deception, entirely unaware of the catastrophic ruin waiting for them just beyond the restaurant doors. Finally, the plates were cleared away. The laughter died down as their stomachs filled and the wine bottles ran dry. The waiter approached our table carrying a sleek black leather checkbook. He placed it directly in the center of the table, right between Richard and Julian. The total silence that fell over the table was incredibly revealing. Richard, the man who had been boasting loudly all night about his country club memberships and his high society connections, suddenly became very interested in the ceiling architecture. He made absolutely no move to touch the leather booklet. Julian shifted uncomfortably in his seat, patting his pockets as if he had conveniently forgotten his wallet. They were broke. Every single one of them was drowning in debt, and a dinner bill at LeBlanc was enough to send their overdrawn bank accounts into a complete tailspin. Chloe, noticing the awkward hesitation from her father and her husband, let out a soft, manipulative sigh. She reached out with her manicured hand, picked up the black leather checkbook, and opened it. I watched her eyes scan the final number. $3,240. A tiny, wicked smile played on her lips. She closed the booklet and slid it slowly across the smooth white tablecloth, stopping it right in front of my empty soup bowl. You know what, Desmond, Chloe said, her voice echoing loudly in the quiet alcove. Since this is your final night out in the real world, and since Julian and I have spent so much time and energy managing your transition, we think you should treat us tonight. It is the least you can do to say thank you for all our hard work. I looked down at the black leather booklet. I did not reach for it. I did not flinch. How exactly do you expect me to pay for a $3,000 dinner, Chloe? I asked quietly. You all know I live on a very strict fixed income. Chloe leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms with a look of absolute, untouchable arrogance. Oh, do not play the poor old man card tonight, Desmond. We all know you have a little bit of credit left. In fact, I have that premium credit card of yours right here in my purse. The one you asked me to hold on to for safekeeping because your memory has been so bad lately. She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a shiny metallic credit card. It was one of the fraudulent cards she had secretly opened in my name months ago. The card she had been using to steal my identity and fund her desperate lifestyle. She tossed it onto the table. It landed on top of the leather checkbook with a sharp plastic clack. Just tell the waiter to put it on this one, she said, her eyes gleaming with malicious satisfaction. Consider it your parting gift to the family. After tonight, you will not have any use for money anyway. I stared at the stolen credit card bearing my forged name. Then I looked up at Chloe. I looked at Julian, who was staring down at his empty plate in complete shame. I looked at Richard and Patricia, who were smiling like they had just won the lottery. They had eaten the feast. They had gloated over my grave. And now they were demanding that I pay for the very rope they planned to hang me with. I slowly reached my hand out and rested my fingertips on top of the black leather booklet. I did not pick up the credit card. I let the silence stretch for 5 long, suffocating seconds. The trap was fully loaded. The cage doors were shut tight. It was time to pull the trigger. I stared at the stolen credit card bearing my forged name. Then I looked up at Chloe. I looked at Julian, who was staring down at his empty plate in complete shame. I looked at Richard and Patricia, who were smiling like they had just won the lottery. I slowly reached my hand out and rested my fingertips on top of the black leather booklet. I did not pick up the credit card. I let the silence stretch for 5 long, suffocating seconds. The trap was fully loaded. The cage doors were shut tight. It was time to pull the trigger. I pushed the leather checkbook away from me. It slid smoothly across the pristine white tablecloth, stopping right in front of Chloe. The shiny metallic credit card slid off and clattered against her empty wine glass. I am not paying for this dinner, Chloe, I said. My voice was no longer the raspy whisper of a defeated old man. It was the deep, resonant baritone of a man who commanded boardrooms. I am not paying for your lobster, Richard. And I am certainly not allowing you to use a fraudulent credit card opened under my stolen identity to fund your pathetic illusions of wealth. The smug smiles vanished from Richard and Patricia instantly. Chloe blinked her eyes, darting back and forth. "What are you talking about, Desmond?" she stammered, trying to maintain her arrogant posture. "Stop acting crazy, Ding. You are making a scene. People are staring at us." I ignored her. I reached inside the breast pocket of my tailored charcoal suit and pulled out my mobile phone. I placed it gently in the exact center of the table, right next to the floral centerpiece. I unlocked the screen. I opened the audio application. I turned the volume up to the absolute maximum setting. Julian looked up from his plate, his brow furrowing in confusion. "Dad, what is that? What are you doing?" "I am giving you my farewell gift," I replied coldly. "I told you I had a surprise for you tonight. I think it is time we listen to it." I pressed the play button. The audio began with a soft, static crackle that cut through the ambient noise of the restaurant. The grand piano in the corner was playing a soft classical melody, but the voices coming from my phone were crisp, loud, and undeniably clear. The first voice that filled our dining alcove was Dr. Arthur Thorne. "I have them right here," the doctor's recorded voice said smoothly. "Fully signed and notarized by my clinic. It formally declares Desmond Holloway mentally unfit and highly recommends the immediate transfer of his estate control to his next of kin. It is bulletproof." Patricia gasped loudly, dropping her linen napkin onto her lap. Richard sat up completely straight, his jaw dropping open. Then Chloe's recorded voice played. "Excellent," she whispered on the recording, her tone filled with wicked triumph. The recording continued without a single pause. However, the doctor added, "I believe we agreed on a consulting fee for this specific house call. I am putting my medical license on the line for this favor, Chloe. $10,000 in untraceable cash, exactly as you asked." Chloe's recorded voice replied, cold and businesslike. "Count it if you want, but it is all there. I took it out of a secondary credit account." The color drained out of Chloe's face so fast she looked like a corpse. The arrogant smirk she had worn all evening was completely wiped away, replaced by a mask of absolute sheer terror. Her pale blue eyes widened until they looked like they were going to pop out of her skull. Her mouth opened, but she could not force a single sound through her paralyzed vocal cords. Patricia looked at her daughter in absolute shock. "Chloe, what is this?" Patricia stammered, her voice trembling. "What did you do?" But the recording was not finished. I had edited the audio files together, piecing the most damning evidence into one continuous loop of destruction. The audio shifted slightly, moving to the conversation in the kitchen. "What about my dad?" Julian's recorded voice echoed across the table. Julian's physical body jolted in his chair as if he had just been struck by lightning. He looked at the phone as if it were a live grenade. "Just put him in the cheapest nursing home in the suburbs," Julian's voice continued coldly from the speaker. "Find one of those state-funded places way out past the city limits. I do not care what it looks like. Just make sure it is cheap so it does not eat into the profits from the house sale." Richard leaned back in his chair, staring at his son-in-law with wide, horrified eyes. Even for a broke, desperate man, hearing the sheer callousness of throwing a father away like garbage was shocking. And Chloe Julian's recorded voice demanded, "Make sure you drain his bank cards first. Take his pension money, empty his checking account, take whatever pathetic savings he has left. We are going to need every single penny to cover the remaining interest on your debt. Do not leave him a dime. Consider it done," Chloe's voice agreed, purring with satisfaction. "We will clear out his accounts tomorrow morning before we start packing up his things." I pressed the pause button. The sudden silence at the table was heavier than concrete. The soft piano music playing in the background felt entirely disconnected from the absolute devastation sitting at our table. Several patrons at the nearby tables had stopped eating, turning their heads to look at us, having heard every single word of the conspiracy. Chloe was shaking. Her entire body was trembling so violently that her chair squeaked against the floor. She looked at her parents, then at Julian, then finally at me. The realization that I had known everything from the very beginning, that I had sat in my living room completely lucid while she plotted my demise, hit her like a freight train. She realized I was never a helpless victim. I was the architect of her ruin. Richard began to stutter, waving his hands frantically. "Desmond, listen, this is a terrible misunderstanding. We had no idea they were planning this. We thought you were actually sick. We thought Chloe was helping you. You thought she was helping me." I repeated, my voice dripping with absolute venom. "Or did you think she was helping you, Richard?" Because I recall a very interesting conversation outside my bedroom door where you demanded a 50-50 split of my stolen house to pay off your defaulted mortgages and your past due country club memberships. Richard's mouth snapped shut. His face turned a deep, blotchy red. He looked around the restaurant, suddenly terrified of who else might have heard me expose his financial ruin. Patricia covered her face with her hands, letting out a quiet, muffled sob of utter humiliation. Julian finally snapped out of his paralyzed state. Panic entirely took over his body. His survival instincts kicked in, driving him to do the only thing a coward knows how to do: destroy the evidence. "Dad, what the hell are you doing?" Julian shouted, his voice cracking wildly. He lunged across the table, his expensive suit jacket knocking over a crystal wine glass. The red wine spilled across the white tablecloth, looking exactly like fresh blood. He reached his hand out desperately, trying to snatch the phone from the center of the table. I did not even blink. I reached out with my right hand, moving with a speed and strength he had never seen from me. I clamped my large, calloused hand around his wrist, stopping him dead in his tracks. My grip was like a vice, locking his arm in place. 40 years of manual labor had given me a grip strength that his soft, pampered office hands could never break. "Do not touch my property, Julian," I commanded, my voice low, dangerous, and completely devoid of any paternal warmth. "You sit back down in your chair right now." Julian gasped, staring at my hand gripping his wrist. He looked into my eyes and saw absolutely nothing but cold, hard steel. The father who had loved him, who had forgiven his mistakes, who had carried him on his shoulders, was completely gone. I released his wrist, giving it a slight shove backward. He stumbled back, falling heavily into his velvet chair. He looked around the restaurant, breathing heavily, realizing that there was no way out. The scene had attracted the attention of the maitre d' and several waiters who were standing near the edge of the alcove, watching the drama unfold with wide eyes. "You set us up," Chloe finally whispered, her voice shaking so badly she could barely form the words. "You knew the whole time. You let me bring the doctor. You let me make you the tea. You planned all of this. I did not plan your greed, Chloe," I said smoothly, wiping a drop of spilled wine from the table with my napkin. "I did not force you to open fraudulent credit cards in my name. I did not force you to mortgage your house to violent loan sharks. And I certainly did not force you to forge a medical document to throw me into a state facility. You built this trap entirely by yourself. I just walked you right into it." Julian buried his face in his hands, his shoulders heaving as he began to cry. "Dad, please," he sobbed. "I am sorry. I was desperate. I was so scared of losing everything. We can fix this. Just delete the recordings. We will tear up the property deed. We will act like none of this ever happened. Please do not do this to us." I looked at the son I had raised. He was begging for his life, not because he felt remorse for trying to destroy mine, but because he had finally been caught. He was crying for himself. "It is far too late for apologies, Julian," I said, leaning back in my chair. "The property deed Chloe forced me to sign yesterday is completely worthless. I intentionally signed it with a defective signature. The medical diagnosis is void because Arthur Thorne is a corrupt fraud. But the crimes you committed to get those documents are very real. And the execution was not over yet." The first shot had been fired, but the final blow was already walking through the front doors of the restaurant. The silence in the restaurant was absolute and suffocating. Julian kept his face buried in his hands, softly sobbing into his palms. Chloe stared at me with wide, terrified eyes, her chest heaving as she struggled to pull air into her lungs. Richard and Patricia looked like they had been turned to stone, paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the crimes they had just heard their daughter commit. The elegant patrons of LeBlanc had stopped pretending to eat. Every single eye in the dining room was fixed on our table. The piano player in the corner had completely stopped playing, letting the heavy quiet settle over us like a burial shroud. I took a slow, calm sip of my water. I did not feel an ounce of pity for any of them. They had spent months digging a deep, dark pit to throw me into, and now they were standing right at the bottom of it looking up at me. But the performance was not quite finished. I checked my gold pocket watch. It was exactly 8:30, right on schedule. The heavy brass and glass doors at the front entrance of the restaurant swung open. The maitre d' stepped aside immediately, clearly intimidated by the men who had just walked in. Leading the group was Sterling, my private attorney. He was dressed in a sharp, immaculate black suit, carrying a thick leather briefcase. He moved with the predatory confidence of a man who destroyed lives for a living. Flanking him on either side were two tall, broad-shouldered men wearing dark suits with gold badges clipped to their belts. They were detectives from the Financial Crimes Division of the police department. The three men walked with quiet authority across the plush carpets of the dining room, making a direct line for our alcove. Chloe noticed them first. Her head snapped toward the entrance, and all the remaining color drained from her face. She recognized the badges. She knew exactly what kind of men wore those suits. Her hands began to shake so violently that she had to grip the edge of the table to keep from collapsing out of her chair. Julian looked up through his tears, his eyes widening in sheer panic. Richard and Patricia pressed themselves backward into their velvet chairs as if trying to merge with the upholstery and disappear completely. Sterling stopped directly at the head of our table. He completely ignored Chloe, Julian, and the deeply panicked in-laws. He looked only at me. He gave a short, respectful bow. "Good evening, Mr. Holloway," Sterling said, his voice ringing out clearly in the silent restaurant. "I apologize for interrupting your dinner, sir, but the documentation you requested has been fully finalized and the authorities are ready to proceed." The way Sterling addressed me sent a shockwave around the table. "Mr. Holloway, sir." He did not speak to me like I was a fragile, confused senior citizen. He spoke to me with the utmost deference and respect, the kind of respect reserved only for powerful men. Julian blinked rapidly, looking back and forth between me and the high-powered attorney. "Dad," he whispered, his voice trembling with confusion. "Who is this man? Why is he calling you sir?" I did not answer Julian. I simply nodded to my lawyer. "Please proceed, Sterling," I said calmly. Sterling placed his heavy leather briefcase right on top of the pristine white tablecloth next to the spilled red wine. He unlatched it with two loud, sharp clicks. He pulled out a massive stack of legal files and set them down directly in front of Chloe. Mrs. Chloe Harding. Sterling began, his tone purely clinical and completely devoid of mercy. "I am the senior legal counsel representing the private estate of Desmond Holloway. The two gentlemen standing behind me are detectives with the State Financial Crimes Task Force. We are here tonight regarding several severe federal and state offenses." Chloe opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. She looked like a fish suffocating on dry land. Sterling tapped the thick stack of files with his index finger. "In this folder, we have comprehensive bank records proving that you committed identity theft by opening 5 premium credit cards under Mr. Holloway's name. We have the digital tracking data showing you wired $80,000 of stolen funds to illegal offshore accounts. We also have the recorded confession from your hired document forger, Paul Hayes, who is currently in federal custody. He has provided a full statement confirming that you paid him $50,000 to manufacture fraudulent medical records and a fake last will and testament." Patricia let out a loud, dramatic gasp, clutching her pearl necklace as if she were going to faint. Richard looked like he was about to vomit right onto his expensive plate. Julian stared at his wife, his face twisted in absolute horror. "You paid a forger," he choked out. "You were going to fake his will. Chloe, you told me we were just getting guardianship. You told me we were just protecting his assets." Chloe could not even look at her husband. She kept her terrified eyes locked on the two detectives standing quietly behind Sterling. One of the detectives stepped forward. He did not yell, but his voice carried the heavy weight of the law. "Chloe Harding," he said, "we have enough evidence to arrest you right now for conspiracy to commit fraud, identity theft, and elder abuse. You will need to come with us to the precinct for questioning regarding your involvement with known organized crime syndicates." The reality of the situation finally crashed down on Chloe. The glamorous world she had built, the designer clothes, the country club status, the wealthy friends, it was all turning to dust right in front of her eyes. She was not going to be a rich heiress. She was going to be a convicted felon. But I was not quite done with her. I slowly stood up from my chair. I buttoned my tailored charcoal suit. I stood at my full height, squaring my shoulders. The hunched, frail posture I had maintained for weeks vanished completely. I looked down at them, radiating the quiet, terrifying authority of a man who controlled tens of millions of dollars. I looked directly into Chloe's tear-filled eyes. "You thought you were so incredibly clever, Chloe," I said, my voice low and smooth. "You thought you were dealing with a poor, uneducated mechanic. You thought my $400,000 house was the biggest prize you could ever win. You spent months trying to steal the roof over my head to save your pathetic, failing business." I paused, letting her hang on every single word. "By the way," I continued, my tone turning to absolute ice, "that property transfer deed you shoved in my face yesterday morning is completely void. I signed it with a misspelled name and a fake signature. It has zero legal standing. Chloe sobbed a harsh, wet sound of total defeat. However, I said, leaning slightly forward over the table, the commercial eviction notice for your fashion boutique is completely valid. Chloe stopped crying. She froze, staring up at me with utter confusion. Sterling pulled a single crisp sheet of paper from his briefcase and slid it across the table toward her. You see, Chloe, I explained softly, you never bothered to look up who actually owned the retail plaza where you rent your boutique space. You never looked past the name of the management company. If you had done your research, you would have learned that the entire commercial block is owned by D. Holloway, LLC. The realization hit her like a physical blow to the face. That is right, I whispered, watching the absolute despair wash over her features. I am your landlord, Chloe. And because you used fraudulent funds to pay your business rent, you have violated the morality clause in your commercial lease. Sterling filed the eviction papers this afternoon. Your store is currently being locked down, and your inventory is being seized to cover your outstanding debts to my holding company. No! Chloe screamed a visceral, guttural sound of pure agony. She reached out, trying to grab the eviction notice, but her hands were shaking too violently to pick it up. You cannot do this. It is my business. It is my whole life. You lost the right to a normal life the moment you tried to steal mine, I replied coldly. Julian fell to his knees right there in the middle of the restaurant. He grabbed the edge of my suit jacket, sobbing uncontrollably. Dad, I did not know about the forged will. I swear to God, I did not know she was going that far. Please, Dad, you have to help me. I am your son. You have to save me from this. I looked down at the boy I had sacrificed my entire youth to raise. I felt a deep, profound sadness, but I did not feel any mercy. You are not a victim, Julian, I said, my voice completely steady. I sat in the dark hallway and listened to you agree to throw me into the cheapest facility you could find. I listened to you order your wife to drain every penny from my bank accounts. You traded your father for a clean credit report. I gently pulled my jacket out of his desperate grasp. You wanted to know what it felt like to be ruthless, Julian, I said, looking down at his pathetic, weeping form. Now you know. I looked over at Richard and Patricia, who were sitting in frozen, terrified silence. And as for you, Richard, I added, Sterling has already notified First Sterling Financial about your daughter's criminal activities. Since my private trust owns the controlling shares of that bank, I made sure the board took a very close look at your defaulted mortgages. Expect the foreclosure notices on your estate by Monday morning. Richard let out a strangled gasp, clutching his chest, as his entire world imploded. I turned away from the table. I did not look back at the crying woman, the kneeling son, or the broken parents. I nodded to the detectives, letting them know they could proceed with the arrest. I walked past the silent, staring patrons and out through the heavy brass doors of the restaurant, stepping into the cool, clean night air. The execution was over and the slate was finally wiped clean. The air inside the elegant restaurant fractured into total, absolute chaos. The pristine, sophisticated facade of the Harding family shattered into a million jagged pieces right before my eyes. As I turned toward the heavy brass doors, preparing to leave the nightmare behind me, the sound of Richard roaring echoed through the dining room. I paused, turning back slightly to let the symphony of their destruction wash over me. Richard was no longer the refined country club gentleman who had been mocking me all evening. His face was a mask of pure, unfiltered rage, the veins bulging in his neck. You stupid, arrogant little girl, he screamed at Chloe, his voice cracking with absolute hysteria. You ruined us. You mortgaged our survival for your pathetic vanity boutique, and you dragged us into a federal criminal investigation. We are going to lose everything because of your bottomless greed. Patricia was sobbing uncontrollably, swiping her hands through the air when Chloe desperately tried to reach out to her. Do not touch me, Patricia wailed, her heavy pearl necklaces rattling violently as she recoiled from her own daughter. You lied to us. You told us this old man was a clueless gold mine. You said it was a simple property transfer and that we would have cash by the end of the month. You are going to federal prison, Chloe, and you are taking our entire reputation down with you. Chloe was hyperventilating, cornered by the two stone-faced detectives, completely abandoned by the parents who had raised her to be a monster. I did it for us, she shrieked back at them, her voice raw and grating like scraping metal. I did it to keep up the image you forced on me. You hypocrites. You were perfectly happy to take his money when you thought he was just a helpless old fool. You were plotting to spend his inheritance before he was even in the nursing home. Amidst the vicious screaming match of the Harding family, Julian remained on the floor. My son, the boy I had sacrificed my entire youth for, dragged himself across the plush carpet toward my feet. He looked pathetic. His expensive designer suit was wrinkled and stained with spilled red wine. His face was slick with tears and sweat. He was a broken shell of a man who had traded his soul for a lifestyle he could not even afford. "Dad, please," Julian sobbed, reaching out to grab the hem of my tailored trousers. "You cannot just leave me here. She is going to jail. Her parents are ruined, but I am your son. You have to help me. I have nowhere else to go. You have to let me come stay with you at the house. I will leave her. I will divorce Chloe right now. Just please, Dad, do not let me lose my house. I will do anything you want. Mom would not want you to abandon me like this." Hearing him invoke Vivian made the last remaining embers of my paternal warmth freeze into solid ice. He was willing to throw his wife to the wolves just as easily as he had been willing to throw me into a state-run nursing home. He had no loyalty. He had no spine. He was a coward begging for a lifeline after he had already tried to sink my ship. I stood perfectly still, looking down at the weeping man at my feet. I let him cry. I let the entire restaurant watch him beg. "Your house," I said, my voice cutting through the noise of the room like a perfectly sharpened blade. "You are begging me not to let you lose your house." "Yes," Julian cried, looking up at me with desperate, pleading eyes. "I can sell it. I can start over. I just need time to figure this out." I slowly shook my head, my expression carved from solid stone. "You do not have a house to sell, Julian." The sobbing stopped immediately. Julian froze, his bloodshot eyes staring up at me in pure confusion. Chloe, who had been screaming at her parents, suddenly went completely silent, turning her terrified gaze toward me. Even Richard and Patricia stopped their bickering, sensing that another massive blow was about to be delivered. "What do you mean?" Julian choked out, his voice barely a raspy whisper. I adjusted my suit jacket, looking down at both of them with the cold authority of an executioner. "You and Chloe live in a beautiful $2 million suburban estate," I said smoothly, making sure my voice carried across the silent dining room. "A home you financed through First Sterling Financial, the exact same bank where my private trust holds the controlling shares." Chloe let out a whimpering gasp, her hands flying to cover her mouth. Her eyes darted wildly as the realization of her absolute stupidity crashed down upon her. When Chloe realized her boutique was failing, she took out a second mortgage on that estate, forging your signature, Julian, I explained. She took $500,000 from highly dangerous men. But what she never told you, Julian, was how she was managing to keep those violent men from breaking down your front door and hurting you. Julian looked at his wife, his face contorting in sheer horror. "What did you do, Chloe?" he whispered. "What did you do?" "I will tell you exactly what she did." I continued, relentlessly driving the final nail into their coffin. "She stopped paying your primary mortgage. She diverted every single penny you both earned, including the money she stole from my fraudulent credit cards, to pay the exorbitant interest rates to the mob. You are currently 3 months behind on your mortgage payments to First Sterling Financial. You have been in default for 90 days. Julian collapsed backward onto the floor, staring at the ceiling as if the sky had just fallen and crushed him. As the majority shareholder of the bank, I have a very close working relationship with the executive board. I said, my voice devoid of any mercy. When Sterling presented them with the undeniable proof of Chloe committing massive financial fraud and forging guarantor signatures, the bank acted immediately to protect its financial assets. I stepped closer, towering over my son and his criminal wife. At 9 o'clock this morning, the bank officially triggered the acceleration clause in your mortgage contract, I declared. A civil judge signed the emergency foreclosure order at noon. Your property has been completely seized. The locks have already been changed by the county sheriff. Your luxury cars have been repossessed from your driveway. All of your personal checking and savings accounts have been frozen pending a massive federal investigation. Chloe let out a blood-curdling scream, collapsing heavily into the arms of the detective holding her. Her legs completely gave out. Her parents backed away, looking at her as if she were a radioactive corpse. "You have absolutely nothing left," I whispered, but the sound echoed like thunder in their ears. "You do not have a house. You do not have a car. You do not have a single dollar to your name. The life you thought you were living was a complete illusion." I looked straight into Chloe's tear-streamed, mascara-stained eyes. She was hyperventilating, shaking so violently her teeth were visibly chattering. She looked like a drowning animal, finally realizing there was no surface to swim to. I leaned down just slightly, bringing my face closer to hers. I maintained absolute, unbroken eye contact. I prepared to ask her the exact same question she had mocked me for asking at my birthday party just 48 hours ago. "Tell me, Chloe, I asked, my voice echoing in the dead silence of the restaurant. If today, right now, you found out you were completely homeless, how would you feel? She squeezed her eyes shut and let out a broken, agonizing wail. It was the sound of a completely shattered soul. She had no clever comebacks. She had no arrogant sneers. She had no fake smiles. She had nothing but the crushing reality of her own making. She was going to federal prison, and she was going there as a penniless beggar. I stood back up and looked at Julian one last time. He was curled into a tight ball on the floor of the most expensive restaurant in the city, sobbing like a broken child. I did not reach a hand out to help him up. I did not offer a word of comfort. He had made his choices. He had chosen greed over his own father. I turned my back on them. I walked smoothly toward the heavy brass doors of the restaurant. The maitre d' scrambled to open them for me, bowing his head respectfully as I passed. I stepped out into the cool, refreshing night air of the city. I breathed in deeply, filling my lungs with the scent of absolute freedom. Behind me, the loud, piercing sirens of police cruisers began to echo through the downtown streets, coming to collect the trash I had finally taken out. I stood just outside the heavy brass doors of the restaurant, the cool night air biting sharply at my tailored suit, but I did not walk away to my waiting car just yet. You cannot build a cage this intricate and not stay to watch the heavy iron doors finally lock. Through the pristine floor-to-ceiling windows of the dining room, the scene played out like a brilliant tragic theater production. The muffled sounds of their absolute ruin still reached my ears through the glass. Sterling stood silently beside me on the pavement, his arms crossed over his chest, watching the masterpiece of justice we had orchestrated together. Inside the alcove, the two detectives from the Financial Crimes Division finally made their move. The taller detective, a man with a face carved from granite, stepped right up to Chloe. I could see her shaking her head frantically, holding her trembling hands up as if trying to physically push away the massive weight of the consequences crashing down on her. It was absolutely no use. The detective pulled a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. Even through the thick pane of glass, I could read his lips and hear the echo of the charges in my mind. Chloe Harding, you are under arrest. The charges were a laundry list of total devastation, wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit elder abuse, forging medical records, fraudulent misappropriation of property. Chloe fought back. She thrashed wildly, her expensive backless evening gown twisting awkwardly as the detective forcefully spun her around and slammed her wrists together behind her back. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs was something I felt deep in my bones. She screamed a wild, feral sound of pure panic that made the remaining restaurant patrons actively step back in horror. The glamorous, untouchable boutique owner, who just an hour ago had laughed at the idea of feeding me pureed food in a nursing home, was now a hysterical, handcuffed criminal being dragged past the tables of the city elite. Richard and Patricia did not rush to defend their daughter. Like the cowards they truly were, they tried to physically distance themselves from her. I watched Richard raise his hands defensively, speaking rapidly to the second detective, pointing his finger at Chloe. He was clearly trying to throw his own flesh and blood under the bus to save his pathetic country club reputation and keep himself out of a federal prison cell. We did not know he was pleading. We had no idea she forged those documents. But the second detective simply pulled out a small leather notepad. I knew exactly what he was telling them. Richard and Patricia Harding, you are officially named as primary persons of interest in an ongoing federal racketeering and fraud investigation. The detective handed Richard a stiff, formal piece of paper. It was a federal subpoena. He informed them that their bank accounts were immediately frozen pending a deep forensic audit. Their passports were officially flagged, and they were strictly forbidden from leaving the state. Patricia felt her knees buckle completely. She collapsed heavily back into her velvet chair, her face buried in her shaking hands, her expensive pearl necklace tangling in her frantic fingers. They were completely and utterly ruined. The fake empire they had paraded around for years, the superiority they had weaponized against me, had been burned to the absolute ground in less than 20 minutes. And then there was Julian, my son. He was still kneeling on the plush carpet, completely abandoned by the family he had sold his very soul to impress. As the police dragged his screaming wife toward the exit, she did not look at him with love. She did not beg him for help. She cursed at him. She spat venom at him, blaming him for being too weak, for not stealing my money faster, for letting me manipulate them. Julian just knelt there, his tear-stained face staring at the empty space where his entire life used to be. The detectives marched Chloe out through the heavy brass doors onto the sidewalk. She locked eyes with me for one brief, agonizing second as they pushed her toward the waiting police cruiser. All the arrogance, all the snobbery, all the racist and classist disdain she held for me was completely gone. It was replaced only by the hollow, terrifying realization that she was going to spend the best years of her life in a federal penitentiary. The police shoved her into the back of the cruiser, forcing her head down, and the door slammed shut with a heavy final thud. Julian stumbled out of the restaurant a few moments later. He looked like a man who had just survived a violent shipwreck only to realize he was stranded in the middle of a freezing dark ocean. He looked wildly up and down the busy street. He frantically patted his pockets and pulled out his phone, trying to open a ride-sharing app. I watched as his screen flashed bright red. His primary card was declined. He tried a second card. Declined. All of his accounts were linked to the assets Chloe had tainted with her fraud, and the bank had frozen every single penny. He stumbled over to the valet stand, waving his ticket at the attendant. The young man looked at him with pity and shook his head. "I am sorry, sir," the valet said loudly enough for me to hear. "A tow truck came 20 minutes ago with an active repossession order from the bank. Your vehicle is gone." Julian dropped the valet ticket onto the concrete. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He had absolutely no car. He had no access to cash. His house was locked and seized by the county sheriff. He was standing on the sidewalk in the middle of the city night with literally nothing but the wine-stained suit on his back. He was, in every sense of the word, entirely homeless. He saw me standing a few yards away by my waiting private town car. He took a hesitant, trembling step toward me. His face was a mask of absolute desperation. "Dad," he whispered, the cold wind whipping his voice away. "Dad, where do I go? What do I do? I have no money for a hotel. I cannot even buy a bus ticket. Please, let me come home with you, just for tonight. I will sleep on the floor in the living room. I will do whatever it takes. I will make this right." I looked at the man shivering in the street. I remembered the little boy who used to hold my calloused hand as we walked to the neighborhood park. I remembered the teenager I had worked double shifts to send to college, but that boy was gone. The man standing before me had sat in my dark kitchen and coldly agreed to dump me in the cheapest, most miserable nursing home he could find, just so he could pay off his wife's criminal debts. "You do not have a home with me, Julian," I said. My voice was incredibly steady, offering absolutely no warmth, no anger, just the cold, hard truth. "You traded your father for a comfortable illusion. You thought you could throw me away and keep the money. Now the illusion is gone, and so is your father. But it is freezing out here," Julian cried, his teeth beginning to chatter uncontrollably. "I have nowhere to sleep tonight." I looked him dead in the eye, feeling the absolute closure of a circle that had begun 2 nights ago at a birthday dinner. "Then I suggest you find a very warm park bench, Julian," I replied smoothly. "Or perhaps you can walk to the county shelter downtown. I hear they have cots available if you get there early. It is not exactly a $2 million estate, but beggars cannot be choosers." I turned to my driver, who immediately opened the heavy door of the sleek, black town car. I slid into the warm, luxurious leather interior. Julian rushed forward, slapping his bare hands against the tinted glass as the engine purred to life. "Dad, please, do not leave me here. You cannot do this." I did not roll down the window. I did not look at him again. I simply gave the driver a slight, firm nod. The town car pulled smoothly away from the curb, merging into the city traffic. I looked in the side mirror one last time. Julian Holloway was standing entirely alone on the cold sidewalk, surrounded by the flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers. He had absolutely nothing left. No wife, no home, no money, and no family. The price of his betrayal had been paid in full. The first night of absolute poverty is a cold, cruel teacher. It does not care about the designer label on your suit jacket or the memories of the vintage wine you drank just hours before. The next morning, as the gray dawn broke over the city skyline, Julian Holloway learned this lesson in the most brutal way imaginable. I was not there to see it, but my security team provided a very thorough report. Julian had spent the night shivering on a damp wooden bench in the municipal park just 3 blocks away from the luxury hotel where his wealthy friends were sleeping warmly in their suites. None of those friends had answered his frantic phone calls. When a man loses his money in that social circle, he becomes entirely invisible. He becomes a disease they are terrified of catching. Julian woke up with his pristine white shirt stained with dirt and morning dew. His perfectly styled hair was a tangled mess. He sat up on the park bench, pulling his thin suit jacket tightly around his shoulders, trying to retain whatever meager body heat he had left. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. The screen was completely black. The battery had died sometime during the freezing night, severing his final connection to the artificial world he had destroyed his own soul to protect. He was forced to gather the few pathetic items he had managed to salvage: a useless car key to a repossessed vehicle, an empty wallet full of canceled plastic cards, and a crumpled linen napkin he had absent-mindedly stuffed into his pocket at the restaurant. He stuffed them into his jacket and began to walk aimlessly down the concrete path joining the ranks of the forgotten shadows of the city. He had traded the unconditional love of a father who would have moved mountains for him for a life on the streets. The transition from a $2 million estate to a public park bench took less than 12 hours. While my son was learning how to survive the harsh reality of the pavement, I was experiencing a very different kind of mourning. I stepped out of my private elevator onto the top floor of the tallest glass and steel skyscraper in the financial district. The heavy oak doors slid open, revealing the sprawling, quiet sanctuary of my executive office. For 20 years, I had only visited this office in secret, arriving after hours, or conducting business through encrypted phone calls while wearing my old mechanic clothes. I had hidden my success to protect my family, but there was no one left to protect anymore. The hiding was officially over. I walked across the plush carpet, the floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking panoramic view of the entire city. I could see the distant smokestacks of the old auto plants where I had broken my back for 4 decades. I could see the glittering retail plazas I had built from the ashes of those abandoned lots. I could see the very streets where my son was currently wandering. I walked over to my massive mahogany desk and sat down in the high-backed leather chair. I poured myself a cup of rich, dark coffee from the silver carafe on the side table. For the first time in years, I took a deep, full breath without feeling the heavy, crushing weight of disappointment pressing down on my chest. I felt a profound, undeniable peace. The intercom on my desk buzzed softly. "Mr. Holloway," my assistant said, her voice crisp and professional. "Mr. Sterling is here with the final documents you requested." "Send him in," I replied. Sterling walked into the office carrying his familiar leather briefcase. He looked around the immaculate space, a faint smile of respect touching his lips. He knew better than anyone how long I had waited to sit openly in this chair. "Good morning, Sir," Sterling said, taking a seat across from my desk. "I have the updates on the Harding situation. Chloe Harding was denied bail this morning. Given her connections to organized crime and the extreme flight risk, the federal judge ordered her remanded to the county detention center to await trial. Her parents have been officially served with foreclosure notices and are currently under audit by the IRS. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the warmth spread through my body. Excellent work, Sterling. They built their own cages. We simply locked the doors. What about the final piece of business? Sterling opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick-bound legal folio. He placed it carefully on my desk and handed me a gold fountain pen. "I have drafted the endowment exactly as you instructed," Sir Sterling said. "This establishes the Vivian Holloway Foundation for Senior Protection. It is a completely irrevocable trust designed to provide top-tier legal representation, emergency housing, and financial auditing for elderly individuals who are actively being abused or defrauded by their own family members." I looked down at the document, seeing my beautiful late wife's name printed in bold, elegant letters at the top of the page. Vivian would have been utterly heartbroken to see the monster our son had become. She would have wept for him. But she also would have been incredibly proud of me for standing up, refusing to be a victim, and turning our pain into a shield for others. Not every senior citizen had a hidden $45 million real estate empire to fight back with. Most of them were truly exactly what Chloe thought I was: fragile, isolated, and entirely defenseless against the predatory greed of their own children. They needed a sword, and I was going to buy them the sharpest one money could forge. I funded the trust with an initial deposit of $5 million. I gripped the gold fountain pen firmly. My hand did not shake. My mind was completely clear. I signed my true, authentic signature at the bottom of the page, pressing the ink deeply into the heavy paper. "It is done," I said, sliding the folio back across the desk to Sterling. "Make sure the foundation is fully operational by the end of the month. I want a team of the most aggressive, ruthless lawyers you can find. If another arrogant child tries to forge a medical document to steal their parents' home, I want our foundation to absolutely crush them in court." "Consider it a promise," Mr. Holloway Sterling said, closing his briefcase and standing up. He gave me a respectful nod and walked out of the office, leaving me alone with the quiet hum of the city far below. I turned my chair to face the massive windows looking out over the sprawling metropolis. The sun was shining brightly, reflecting off the glass towers. I had lost a son, but I had regained my entire soul. I was 73 years old, and for the first time in my life, I was completely and unapologetically free. True wealth is not just measured by the numbers sitting in a bank account, but by the integrity with which we treat those who raised us. Greed is a blinding poison. It convinces fools that kindness is weakness and silence is ignorance. My family thought they were hunting a helpless old man, never realizing that the deepest roots hold the strongest trees. When you try to bury someone out of selfishness, you only dig your own grave. Respect the elderly for their quiet observation sees far more than you think. In the end, betrayal always carries a price tag you can never afford to pay. Thank you for listening to my story today. If you found this journey of justice satisfying, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more life stories. Let me know in the comments section below how you would have handled a betrayal like this. Your support means everything, and I will see you in the next video.